Chapter 872. How is this possible? Cui Shixin's face was pale and his expression was one of fear. Is she really dead? How did she die? The bailiff once again placed his hand under the woman's nose and carefully examined her neck. With great difficulty, he said, she was strangled to death by young Master Chu. Chu Ping sluggishly sat on the ground and continued to mutter to himself, "It wasn't me, it wasn't me. I told you that if she couldn't take it anymore, she could just pat the bed and I would stop. Chu Ping, quickly, put on your clothes and come with us." Cui Shixin finally came back to his senses. He looked at Chu Ping and said anxiously. He then instructed the constable, "Go and open the window at the back. You two, stand guard here. Don't let anyone in." Their original plan was to use the matter of Chu Ping visiting a prostitute to make the Chu family owe them a small favor. Who would have thought that a life would be lost? This favor was too great. Not only could the Chu family not bear it, they couldn't pay it back either. He looked at Chu Ping, who was still in a daze, and solemnly said, "Remember, the person who killed Lady Shuangshuang was the criminal of the imperial court who jumped out of the window. When that villain wanted to hurt you, it was fortunate that the bailiffs from the capital governor's office arrived in time." Seeing that Chu Ping was still sitting there and muttering to himself, Cui Shixin fiercely slapped his face and angrily said, "Did you hear me clearly?" Chu Ping's mouth was overflowing with blood as he raised his head to look at him. His eyes gradually regained their clarity and he nodded, I heard it clearly." Cui Shixin walked out and closed the door. He said to the two bailiffs at the door, "Watch this place, no one is allowed to enter or leave." The beautiful woman walked over and worriedly asked, "Young Master Cui, inside, shut up." Cui Shixin coldly looked at her and said, "Have everyone go downstairs. I suspect that there is a criminal of the imperial court among them. If they are found, your wonderful sound pavilion will not be able to escape responsibility." The beautiful woman's face paled. Criminal of the imperial court. In the Cui clan, Cui Qingming sat in the main hall, leisurely drinking tea. When he saw Cui Shixin rushing in from outside, he stood up and frowned. "What's wrong? Did you not succeed? Didn't you already use 1,000 silver taels to bribe that girl?" Cui Shixin swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said with a trembling voice, "It's done." "Since it's done, why are you panicking?" But that woman was killed by Chu Ping." "What?" Cui Qingming suddenly stood up. The teacup fell to the ground with a clang and shattered. He looked at Cui Shixin and asked in disbelief, that woman is dead?" "Father, don't worry. For the time being, no more people know about this. I've already sent people to control that place." Cui Shixin looked at him and said anxiously, "Father, what should we do now? If they were only acting in secret, a few lives were nothing to them. However, the problem was that today's matter was specially arranged by them. Those bailiffs had caused such a huge commotion, it was impossible for them to easily cover it up. What about the capital governor's residence?" Cui Shixin immediately said, "I haven't sent anyone to inform them yet. Send someone to tell Lord Sing to slow down his actions." "What about you, father? Get someone to prepare a carriage. I want to go to the Chu family immediately." In the Chu family, a middle-aged man looked at Cui Qingming and said, "Brother Cui, why have you come to the Chu family so late at night? Father is already asleep. If there's anything, we can talk about it tomorrow." Cui Qingming took a deep breath and said, "Brother Chu, time is of the essence. I don't have time to explain to you now. If there's any delay, nephew Chu Ping will probably be in big trouble." Upon hearing his son's name, the middle-aged man immediately asked, "What big trouble?" Cui Qingming said in a low voice, "It concerns nephew Chu Ping's life, and even more so, the Chu family's reputation." The middle-aged man's expression changed drastically. He immediately said, "Brother Chui, please sit here for a moment. I'll immediately invite father over." Chui Qingming didn't sit for long before he saw Grand Tutor Chu draped in a thick cloak and supported by someone. He hurriedly got up and said respectfully, "Greetings, Lord Grand Tutor." The old man waved his hand and asked, "Just what happened? Speak." Chui Qingming hesitated for a moment, then said, "Tonight, Xiaxian and nephew Chu Ping went to the fine sound pavilion to listen to music. A woman in the pavilion revealed her feelings to Chu Ping. It's hard for young people to be a little impatient. Coincidentally, the constables of the capital governor's residence were searching for a criminal of the imperial court, and they accidentally ran into the two of them having sex." The middle-aged man's expression relaxed slightly. "If it was just this, it wouldn't be too serious. It was just a normal affair between a man and a woman, and it didn't count as visiting prostitutes. Even if it did, although it would damage the Chu family's reputation, it wouldn't be so serious that it would endanger their lives." The old man looked at him with a sharp gaze. "You came here so late at night for this?" Chui Qingming lowered his head and said in a low voice, "When the constables of the capital governor's residence went in, that woman was dead." A terrified expression appeared on the middle-aged man's face. The old man's body trembled, and he couldn't even hold his crutch steadily. His beard trembled, and he struggled to stand. He repeatedly said, this animal." Chui Qingming looked up and asked, "Xiaxian has already ordered people to temporarily suppress this matter. Now, the people of the capital governor's residence will most likely go over. Qingming came here in the middle of the night to ask Lord Grand Tutor how this matter should be handled." The old man trembled as he walked to a chair and sat down. After a long silence, he waved his hand dispiritedly and said, "This old man is not the capital governor's residence. There is no need to ask me about this matter." A trace of anxiety appeared on the face of the middle-aged man beside him. He was about to speak when Chui Qingming suddenly said, "The criminal of the imperial court that the capital governor's residence captured was truly deranged. He hid in the fine sound pavilion and not only used cruel methods to kill that young lady, but he also wanted to harm nephew Chu Ping. Fortunately, the constables arrived in time." The old man didn't reply. He used the chair to support himself as he stood up with difficulty. His murky gaze rested on Chui Qingming for a long time before he waved his hand and said, "This old man is tired. Qingming is truly sorry to disturb Grand Tutor. Grand Tutor, please do not worry. This matter will definitely not involve nephew Chu Ping." Chui Qingming said this and bowed. "Grand Tutor, rest early. Qingming will return first." The old man used his crutch to walk out the door. He shook off the middle-aged man's support and said in a hoarse voice, "When you return, have him kneel in the ancestral hall." The middle-aged man's expression was complicated as he slowly nodded. "Fifth Master, I'm leaving." The large man looked at the middle-aged man who had already taken off his clothes and went to bed. After saying this, he slowly retreated. A woman wearing coarse clothing walked over with a warm stove in her hand. She said, "The master is afraid of the cold, so I brought an extra stove in." The large man opened the door and said, "I'll help you put it in." The woman smiled and shook her head. "No need. Your hands and feet are clumsy and your footsteps are heavy. The master has just fallen asleep and will be woken up by others. It's better if I go, you go rest." The large man rubbed his head in embarrassment. Then I'll go to sleep first." The woman nodded. After the large man left, she walked into the room and placed the stove on the ground beside the bed. She straightened her body and looked at the middle-aged man on the bed in the darkness. She sighed and said, "You don't need to be sad. Er's body doesn't have many days left. Lian used to love her the most. To be able to do something for you before she goes to see Lian, she must be very happy." In the darkness, the middle-aged man lying on the bed suddenly opened his eyes. He clenched his fists and tore the bed sheets. A suppressed, beast-like roar came from his throat. There's a way, there must be another way. She doesn't need to do this, she doesn't need to do this. In the wonderful sound pavilion, a bailiff once again turned his head to look at the bed. A puzzled expression appeared on his face. He pushed the person next to him and whispered, "Look, isn't she smiling?" The bailiff turned his head to look and saw that the woman was already dead. Sure enough, there was a faint smile on her face. He walked over and covered her body with the bedsheet. He let out a long sigh. She's also a pitiful person. Early in the morning, the large man pushed open the door and walked out. The cold wind blew against his face and made him shiver. He looked at the courtyard full of white in a daze and muttered, "Didn't it get warmer a few days ago? Why is it snowing again?" He returned to his room and wrapped himself with another layer of clothing. Then, he walked out through the garden path and walked towards a courtyard. He stopped halfway. In the depths of the garden, a plum blossom tree had quietly bloomed. It immediately added a few more decorations to the vast expanse of white in the garden. In front of the plum blossom tree, a figure stood straight in the snowflakes that filled the sky. "Fifth Lord, you came out so early today. Why didn't you open an umbrella?" The large man walked over and carefully brushed away the snowflakes on the middle-aged man's shoulders and body. He saw that a thick layer of snow had also fallen on the middle-aged man's head. It was unknown how long he had been standing there. He gently swept away the snowflakes on the middle-aged man's hair. However, there were a few places where the snowflakes couldn't be swept away no matter what. The middle-aged man's movements became sluggish. He looked at the middle-aged man in a daze and a shocked expression appeared on his face. Fifth Lord, you." The middle-aged man turned his head to look at him. He revealed a smile and said, "This person, if you don't pay attention, you will grow old." Chapter 873. Li Yi was woken up by the cold in the morning. Since a few days before the Lantern Festival, the weather had gradually turned warm. Even the quilt on his bed had been changed to a thin one. However, he couldn't stand the cold in the middle of the night. He curled up his body and didn't sleep well. He slept in a daze until dawn. Of course, the reason why he woke up was because the proud Lolita ran in and put her cold little hand into the quilt. He didn't know what she had just done, but her little hand was like an ice cube. After a shiver, he was no longer sleepy. "Sir, get up. The sun is shining on your butt." The proud Lolita was wearing a thick cotton-padded coat. She rolled around the bed like a bear. Li Yi wanted to sleep a little longer in the quilt, so he had to get up. He put on his coat and asked casually, "Why are you here so early today? Don't you need to pay your respects to your father?" The proud Lolita lay on the bed and shook her legs. She said with a sad face, "Father is sick. The imperial doctor said that father needs to rest well these days. I came over after seeing him outside." These days, the old emperor's illness had become more and more serious. Li Yi was a little worried. He only hoped that the winter would pass quickly and that the worst situation would not happen now. Hearing the noise and laughter coming from outside, he wondered, what's going on outside? The proud Lolita curled her lips and said, "They are having a snowball fight. Sister Xiao Huan is already 17 years old, but she is still so childish. I have long stopped playing that kind of game." Li Yi was stunned and asked, "It's snowing?" The proud Lolita nodded and said, "It started last night. It's very, very heavy. Sir, hurry up and get up. Let's go outside and make a snowman. Make the biggest one and make it bigger than theirs." The sudden heavy snow fell silently. Compared to previous years, there was not much snow this winter. However, it still snowed after the Upper Lantern Festival. This was something that had never happened in recent years. Of course, the night of the Upper Lantern Festival did not only have heavy snow, but also poetry. searching for her thousands of times in the crowd. But when I look back, that person is standing in the dim light. This poem only took half a night to spread among the circle of scholars in the capital. The #1 scholar of the Jing kingdom, whose poems had not been circulated for a long time, was so extravagant. This once again cemented his position in the hearts of those who loved poetry. This was not the only incident that caused a stir in the capital last night. There was a vicious court criminal who, while hiding from the bailiffs, hid in a music hall in the capital. After being discovered, in his anger and humiliation, he killed a musician in the music hall and escaped through the window. Now, his wanted poster had been posted all over the streets and alleys of the capital, as well as all the city gates. Furthermore, because that scoundrel had almost injured the young master of the Chu family, the capital governor's manor had already strictly ordered the yamen in the capital region to investigate the whereabouts of that criminal and offered a large reward. This made it so that if the people of Jingdo saw an unidentified outsider outside, they would all secretly pay more attention. The capital yamen. After an old man washed his hands in a copper basin, he respectfully said, "Sir, we have already investigated. This woman died because she suffocated. The 2 strangulation marks on her neck are the cause of her death." Tsing Shichen's face darkened. Has the identity of this woman been investigated? A bailiff came forward and said, "Sir, we have already asked the people in the wonderful sound pavilion. That woman was a musician in the pavilion and had a bit of fame. She did not go to the wonderful sound pavilion every day. As for the situation of her family, we are still not clear. We have already sent more people to investigate." The old man hesitated for a moment and then opened his mouth. "Sir, according to my examination, this woman was actually already infected with a serious illness and did not have much time left. Even if this did not happen, I'm afraid she would not live for more than half a year." Tsing Shichen sighed and said, "Even if she was already beyond cure and did not have much time left, half a year is still 180 days, 2,160 hours, this is still a case of murder." Someone finally stood up behind Tsing Shichen. Cui Qingming looked at the few people in the hall and said, "You may leave first." When the coroner and the bailiffs heard this, they immediately bowed and retreated. Cui Qingming looked at Tsing Shichen and said slowly, "This matter involves the Chu family. The royal tutor has already tacitly agreed to it, so there is no need to complicate matters. Furthermore, that woman does not have much time left. Sir Tsing should know what to do, right? Of course I know the severity of the matter." Tsing Shichen waved his hand. "I will order people to quickly search for that criminal. Don't worry." Cui Qingming smiled. "Then I can rest assured." Tsing Shichen looked at him and asked, "Are you sure that this matter alone will make the Chu family wholeheartedly help us?" "Don't worry, the royal tutor is a smart man. If this matter is exposed, the Chu family's reputation will suffer a severe blow. The royal tutor may not care about himself or Chu Ping, but he will definitely not ignore the reputation that the Chu family has painstakingly built up bit by bit." Cui Qingming smiled again. "If that's the case, that woman's death is not completely useless. His Highness, the King of Shu, is still more important." Tsing Shichen nodded and clenched his fists tightly in his sleeves. He looked at him calmly and said, "Since that's the case, leave the matters here to me. I believe in Sir Tseng." Cui Qingming cupped his hands at him and said, "I have to personally give a reply to the Chu family. I will take my leave first." "Take care." After sending off Cui Qingming, Chen Chong, who had been drinking tea to the side, stood up and said, "If this is all we have, we won't be able to touch the Chu family." Tsing Shichen shook his head. "It's not that we can't touch them, but that the time is not right." "The time is not right?" Chen Chong was taken aback. Then he looked at him and narrowed his eyes. "Do you know what you will do when the time comes? You must give up something to gain." Tsing Shichen looked at him and slowly said, "If you want to obtain something, you must first give up something. be asterisk starred, you be asterisk starred. My Chu family has been of noble character and unquestionable integrity for generations. How did we produce a be asterisk starred like you? Chu Ping knelt on the ground. In front of him were the memorial tablets of the Chu family's ancestors. Grand Tutor Chu raised the cane in his hand and struck it repeatedly on his back. The clothes on his back were already in tatters, and his back was a bloody mess. Grand Tutor Chu's breathing was ragged. A middle-aged man hurriedly patted him on the back and said, "Father, father, don't be agitated." Grand Tutor Chu shook off his hand and looked at him. He said angrily, "You taught your son well." His son had always been traveling with his father, and he had never taught him anything. Although the middle-aged man felt wronged, he did not dare to say anything. Chu Ping knelt there and wailed, "It's all my fault. I've disgraced the Chu family's ancestors. Grandfather, just beat me to death." "Beat you to death? What's the use of beating you to death? Will that woman come back to life if I beat you to death?" Although the old man said this, the cane that he had raised did not come down again. He panted slightly and glanced at Chu Ping. A trace of loneliness appeared on his face. As he turned to leave, he said, "Let the ancestors of the Chu family watch. Let him kneel here for 3 days." Chu Ping lay on the ground, his body trembling. He loudly said, "Thank you, grandfather, thank you, grandfather." Chapter 874. Qin Family. After the family banquet, Qin Xiang looked at his eldest son and said, "The reform mentioned this morning is related to agriculture. If you are not careful, it will shake the foundation of the country. You must be very careful with every step you take. You must not be careless." Qin Yan immediately nodded. "Father, don't worry. I will be extra careful. However, since it is a reform, you don't need to be too conservative." "Don't be too careful," Qin Yan respectfully said, "I understand." After the conversation, Qin Xiang stood up and walked out of the room. Halfway through, he realized that he had left a dossier he had read before the meal on the chair. He turned back, and when he stepped through the door again, he was slightly startled. There was only one person left in the hall. That person was a bit thin. He stood up from the corner of the banquet table and placed the leftovers in front of him. Before he sat down, he saw Qin Xiang standing at the door. "Father," he looked at Qin Xiang and was surprised. Seeing him looking at him, he looked down and smiled. "There is still a lot of food left. If I don't eat, it will be a waste." Qin Xiang looked at his youngest son and was startled. There were strands of white hair on his head. When he smiled, there were wrinkles on his face. He was the youngest of the 5 Qin brothers, but he looked much older than his eldest brother. The old man realized that he had not paid attention to his son for a long time. "Those dishes are already cold. If you're not full, just ask the kitchen to make another serving." Qin Xiang brought the file over. When he walked out, he paused and said, "Don't eat too much at night. Rest early and be careful of your body." Qin he nodded. "Father." Qin Xiang heard the voice and turned around. Qin he looked at him and said with a smile, "The court is in turmoil. Although father is in a high position, you still have to be careful." Qin Xiang frowned and said, "Recently, the court has been unprecedentedly stable. How can there be turmoil? Don't believe the rumors outside." Qin he listened respectfully. After he finished, he nodded and said, "Thank you father for the reminder. I understand." Qin Xiang took another deep look at him, then turned around and left. 5th young master Qin looked at the leftover soup in front of him. The clear soup reflected his image. He stroked a strand of white hair on his head and stared at the soup in a daze. On the night of the Lantern Festival, it snowed all night. Although the snowfall gradually subsided, it still did not clear up. It was still early in the morning. On the streets of the capital, other than a few shops that had their doors half closed, most of the shops that faced the streets were tightly shut. A woman with her hair wrapped up and wearing only a thin shirt stood in front of a small building and knocked for a long time. When a beautiful woman inside opened the door, she rubbed her face that was red from the cold and smiled. "My sister is a musician in this building. She came to perform on the day of the Lantern Festival and hasn't been back for 2 days. Can I trouble you to call her? She's not in good health and has to take medicine every day." The beautiful woman rubbed her sleepy eyes and yawned. She asked in a muffled voice, "What's your sister's name?" The woman smiled and said, "Her name is Shuang Shuang." "Sir, what are they doing?" The proud Lolita lifted the curtain of the carriage window and saw a group of people gathered at the foot of the city wall. She turned her head and asked Li Yi. "They're probably looking at the court's criminal." As the carriage drove over, Li Yi also heard the discussion of some people on the street. It seemed that yesterday, a criminal wanted by the court committed a murder case in the capital. Using the chaos of the Upper Yuan dynasty, he successfully escaped. This made the higher-ups very angry. They did not hesitate to issue a large warrant for his arrest. The bounty was even more generous. They paid a great price to capture this person and bring him to justice. The capital was under the feet of the emperor, and the criminal was a criminal wanted by the court. Coincidentally, it was the Lantern Festival. It was no wonder that the higher-ups had such a big reaction. However, with the warrant being issued, unless the criminal had the ability to change his appearance, it would not be easy for him to escape near the capital. It must be known that around Jingdo, there was a group of madmen who wanted to farm points to raise their ranking. How could they let go of such a good opportunity? In principle, for a criminal wanted by the court with great fanfare to appear in Jingdo and commit another crime was an inconceivable thing. However, there was always an oversight. At this moment, the matter of the criminal was not important to him. The old emperor's health was more important. This snow had come suddenly, and the old emperor's illness had also worsened suddenly. From the beginning, Li Yi knew that there was no possibility of his illness recovering. Sometimes, it was all about luck. Even though he had already let go of court affairs and focused on recuperating, no one knew when bad luck would arrive. Li Yi's mood was a bit depressed. Some things could be solved perfectly, and some things could not. Faced with this matter, even he felt a deep sense of helplessness from the bottom of his heart. The carriage suddenly came to a stop. The proud Lolita lost her balance and fell on top of him. A red cloud appeared on her face. In a small voice, she said, "Sir, I didn't do it on purpose." Li Yi supported her waist and helped her sit properly. The angry scolding of a palace guard could already be heard from outside. "How do you walk? Don't you have eyes?" After scolding, the guard knocked on the carriage in a panic and asked, "Your Highness, are you all right?" "I'm fine," the proud Lolita replied in a small voice. She then asked, "What happened outside?" The guard immediately said, "A woman suddenly walked out of the alley and almost ran into her. I had no choice but to rein in the horse and disturb your Highness. Please forgive me, your Highness." The proud Lolita asked in a quiet voice, "She didn't hurt anyone, did she?" A guard had already helped the woman who had fallen to the ground up. He furrowed his brows and asked, "Are you all right?" The woman didn't look at him. Her eyes were unfocused as she walked forward in a daze. Strange person. The guard glanced at her and turned his head. "Your Highness, she didn't hurt anyone. Let's keep going." Li Yi lifted the curtain to take a look, only to see a distant silhouette. He shook his head and lowered the curtain again. After visiting the old emperor, the dark clouds in Li Yi's heart dissipated a little when he walked out of the hall. Naturally, it was because his illness wasn't as serious as he had expected. It was probably because of the sudden drop in temperature that he was having a relapse. A eunuch led him to the side hall and said that the heir and the eldest princess were already waiting there. When Li Yi and the proud Lolita walked in, they found that they weren't the only ones in the side hall. Princess Ning was holding Mingzhu's hand and talking. Li Xian was playing chess with Ning Wang. Seeing them enter, Princess Ning waved at the proud Lolita. "Ning, come quickly, come here," Li Yi bowed slightly and said, "Greetings to Ning Wang and Princess Ning." Every year at the beginning of the year, the nobles from all over would enter the capital. Because Li Xian was in the capital, Ning Wang's family would often stay for a few more days. "Dr. Li, no need to be so courteous." Ning Wang waved his hand and looked at him. He shook his head and said, "In terms of the ability to judge people, I really am not as good as my royal brother. Dr. Li is an outstanding person. I actually misjudged you back then." Chapter 875. You flatter me, Your Highness. Li Yi cupped his hands in greeting politely. He did not appear overly intimate, nor did he appear overly distant. His friendship with Li Xian was limited to the two of them. He once had some connection with Ning Wangfu, but that was a long time ago. You've been in the capital for so long, and you even have a child, but your chess skills haven't improved at all. Ning Wang picked up a black piece and put it down. He looked at Li Xian and shook his head. Li Xian smiled awkwardly and said, "Father's chess skills are superb. I am ashamed." Ning Wang looked up at Li Yi and suddenly said, "I wonder if Dr. Li is interested in playing a game with I." To tell you the truth. Li Yi looked at Ning Wang and shook his head. "I am not proficient in Go." He was speaking the truth. He had never played Go in his previous life. Although the rules and playing methods could be easily learned, he couldn't learn the experience. Otherwise, he wouldn't have to play with the proud lowly and release the Dumbo, the earth-drilling mouse, and the celestial dog. With his current level of Go, he could only fool ordinary people. He was far from a master of Go. Li Xian had already given up his seat. He said, "You are the #1 talent of the Jing Kingdom. Don't be humble. It would be best if you could win a few games against father and help me save some face." Li Xian stood up. Ning Wang was sitting across from him and looking at him. It would be too awkward to refuse again. Li Yi could only nod and sit across from Ning Wang. "Sir, you are playing Go with uncle." The proud lowly ran over from the side and sat next to Li Yi. She propped up her chin with her hands and poked her head out to watch the game. Princess Ning and Emingzu also walked over. Ning Wang looked up at Li Emingzu and said, "These days, thanks to you, brother can recuperate in peace. If it were anyone else, he wouldn't be able to relax in the affairs of the court." Princess Ning held her hand and said worriedly, "Look, it has only been a year. You are so thin now." Li Yi didn't quite understand Princess Ning's words. She drank soup every day, and he even added some special ingredients to the soup. How was she skinny? Martial artists like her had well-proportioned bodies and didn't have any excess fat on their bodies. From head to toe, there were parts of her body that were fatter than a year ago. It was impossible for her to be skinny. It is indeed inappropriate to let you decide the affairs of the country alone. Prince Ning put down a piece and said, "The efficiency in the 3 provinces is low, and there are many useless people. Outside the 3 provinces, you should make an exception and find some talented and virtuous people to help you deal with those trivial matters. You." After he said, he looked at Yi and said, "Dr. Li is really not good at Go." Before Li Yi could speak, the proud lowly wrinkled her nose and said, "Uncle, I will play for you." Ning Wang smiled and said, "Since when does our Ning know how to play Go? I will not play with you. If your father knows, he will say that I am bullying the young." The proud lowly put a piece on the board and said discontentedly, "Uncle, don't look down on me. I am very good at Go." "Good, good, good. Ning is the best." Seeing that Li Yi didn't mind, Prince Ning didn't say much. He played with her hand, but his moves were not as sharp as before and became casual. Princess Ning continued the conversation and looked at Emingsu. She said, "Your uncle is right. You still need to find someone to help you in the affairs of the country. The capital governor is good. The people from the Shin family are said to be very capable. Prime Minister Qin is old now, but there are still a few people from the Qin family in the court. Like father, like son. In short, it is not so easy to take over the government affairs. Don't tire yourself out. Dong Wenyun is indeed very capable. Although the one from the Shin family is not as good as him, he is also not bad. As for the Qin family, except for Prime Minister Qin, there is no one capable." Prince Ning shook his head. He seemed to think of something and said, "Qin He of the Qin family, what is his position in the court now?" "Qin He." A glimmer of confusion appeared in Mingzhu's eyes. In the second generation of the Qin family, other than Qin Yan, there were two other people who were officials in the court. She had never heard of this Qin He. Li Yi, who was watching the proud lowly play Go, said, "Qin He, the fifth son of Prime Minister Qin. He has always been idle at home and has no official position. That is a bit strange." Prince Ning shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He continued to talk about the matters of the court with the eldest princess. Li Yi had always thought that this Prince Ning, who was far away from the capital, was just an idle prince. However, when he talked about these matters, it was as if he had been in the court for a long time. It was truly surprising. Qin He, the fifth master of the Qin family. He had just said that the Qin family had no one capable, but he had singled out Qin He. What was so special about this fifth master of the Qin family? From Wu Er's side, there would often be news of the Qin family. More or less, the name of the fifth master of the Qin family would appear. However, the general description was the same as the rumors in the outside world. This fifth master of the Qin family did not have much of a position in the Qin family. He could even bully the younger generation of the Qin family as he pleased. As a result, he had always been in a state of self-abandonment. However, sometimes, he would do some strange things. The proud lowly saw that his mood was not too high and thought that he was upset because he couldn't beat Imperial Uncle Ning Wang. She patted her little chest and said, "Sir, don't worry, we are about to win." Prince Ning, who was talking to Emingsu, turned his head and couldn't resist smiling. Although little Shaning knew how to play Go, which was somewhat unexpected, her skill level was not high. He only needed to casually deal with it. This Dr. Li was a friend of Emingsu and Xian. Naturally, he couldn't let him lose too badly. However, this game of Go had reached this point, so there was no need to continue. He smiled and picked up a chess piece. Just as he was about to put it on a certain position, his arms sank halfway. After a slight pause, he could no longer smile. The proud lowly raised Li Yi's palm and reached out her little hand to give it a pat. She said with a smile, "Sir, we won." The princesses of the royal family were not easy to deal with. Don't compete with Emingsu, don't play Go with Shaning. This was an iron rule. Prince Ning lost a game of Go. He was surprised by the proud lowly's Go skills and proposed another game. Of course, the proud lowly would not refuse. After all, Prince Ning had been immersed in Go for many years. No matter how talented the proud lowly was, she was only 14 years old. After a fierce fight, she gradually fell into a disadvantage. Of course, the one who lost in the end was still Prince Ning. Turning defeat into victory and reversing the situation was the proud lowly's specialty. Especially after she used the flying chess, the invisible chess, and the ultimate move of eating up the small chess pieces, Prince Ning lost without any suspense. The old emperor's illness was not as serious as he had imagined, which made him feel a little relieved. On his way home, sitting in the carriage, he inadvertently glanced out through the gap of the curtain, only to find that Fong seemed to have a lot on his mind. Before he could ask, Fong opened the curtain a little and asked, "Young master, I have a question to ask you." Li Yi sat up straight. The first thing he thought about was whether he had encountered anything recently, so that he wouldn't be hurt by his words. After finding that he probably hadn't, he looked at him and said, "What's the matter? Say it." Fong looked at him and hesitated for a long time before he said, "I want to take little Hong home." "What do you think will happen?" "I think you will die." Li Yi looked at him and said without any hesitation. He was well aware of his sister-in-law's temperament. She had bought a large mansion in the capital city, and all the servants in the house were men. Not to mention young and beautiful maidservants, there wasn't even an old lady with yellow pearls. Forget about bringing Xiao Hong back. If she knew what Lao Fong had been secretly doing for the past 2 years, Lao Fong wouldn't be sitting in the carriage and asking him this question now. With his timid personality, how could he suddenly have such a suicidal idea? Li Yi thought for a moment, looked at him, and asked suspiciously, "You didn't take the girl's body, and now you can't take it anymore, right? How could that be?" Fong waved his hands repeatedly. "Young master, even you don't dare to do this kind of thing. How could I, really? Really?" Fong raised a hand. "I swear, if I say half a word of lie, let me be struck by lightning." No sincerity. Li Yi shook his head and said, "It's winter, how could there be lightning?" Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, a thunderous sound suddenly exploded in his ears. Fong's whole body trembled. He looked up at the sky and found that there was no more sound. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "I really didn't do it, could it be that young master?" Boom. 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 The deafening sound came again, and it hurt people's eardrums. Chapter 876. The rumbling sound came suddenly. Fong turned over and rolled off the carriage. He looked at the sky vigilantly. After listening for a while, he realized that the sound did not come from the sky. He turned his head and saw that not far ahead, there was a woman beating the big drum in front of the yamen. What he heard just now was not thunder, but the drum. He breathed a sigh of relief and jumped back into the carriage. He said, "So someone is beating the court drum." I was scared to death. The court drum was a large drum erected in front of the yamen. It had 2 functions. One was for the county magistrate to beat the drum to gather the crowd when he went to court. The other was for the commoners who had been wronged to beat the drum to express their grievances. Li Yi lifted the curtain and took a look. The woman who had beaten the drum had already been ushered in by the yamen runners. He did not pay much attention to her. He put down the curtain and looked at old Fong. "Are you serious about what you said just now? It's not a good way to go on like this." Fong sighed and said, "There has to be an end to this matter." Li Yi hung the curtains to the side and asked curiously, "How did you and Lil Red meet?" Fong leaned against the carriage and looked at the sky. He smiled and said, "About a year before you came up the mountain." At first, Li Yi thought that Fong was just a simple and honest man without many thoughts. Later, he found that his thoughts, especially when it came to feelings, were extremely delicate. Under his simple and honest appearance, there was a soul of coquettishness. He and Little Red got to know each other because of the old story of a bear saving the beauty. Later, they met in the jadeite courtyard by chance. As time went by, they became familiar with each other. They communicated with each other across the wall in the jadeite courtyard and gradually developed to the point where they were today. According to Fong, it was not to the point. At present, the two of them only held hands in a pure relationship. The relationship between him and Mrs. Fong should be familial, and Little Red was probably Fong's love. As for how to make the two perfectly fuse, if he knew, he wouldn't have to run between them every day. His own affairs were still a mess, and he couldn't help much with Fong's family affairs. Li Yi could only shake his head and say, "Let's think about this at length." "That's right, let's take our time to think about it." Fong nodded and said, Miss Suamo has already succeeded. Second Miss Ruoqing, Princess Royal, Miss Lin, and even Xiao Huan hasn't married yet. I'm afraid that the little princess only has Xiao Huan in her heart. We need to think about them one by one. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, well, I'll ask Rui to go over and talk to Mrs. Fong. Tell her that you want to bring another mistress back. As the first wife of the Fong family, she should be generous and not obstruct you. She will definitely listen to Rui. How about it? That's good enough, right? Fong waved his hand repeatedly. Forget it. I can solve this kind of trivial matter myself. I don't want to trouble Miss. The carriage gradually went away. In the yamen, a constable sent the woman out, shook his head and said helplessly, Miss, this case has been handled by the yamen from the beginning to the end. You can go there and ask. The woman's face was pale, but she still nodded and said, Thank you, constable. The constable looked at her and said with pity, Miss, let me remind you, when you go to the yamen, don't knock the drum in front of the gate. Chu Ping, Cui Shixin. Li Yi crumpled the paper in his hand into a ball and threw it into the stove. Cui Shixin and the young master of the Chu family were also in the wonderful sound pavilion when the imperial court criminal committed the murder. It was said that they were almost implicated. This was also one of the reasons why the capital governor's office placed so much importance on this case. He had never underestimated the Chu family and had always sent people to keep an eye on them. However, this matter had been handled by the yamen from the beginning to the end. Tsing Shichen hadn't sent any news, so there shouldn't be any problems. He warmed his hands by the fire, then picked up his brush and began to write on the rice paper spread out on the table. Mississippi Lu insisted that the green jade case, lantern festival, he had written on the lantern that day was too sloppy. There were many words in it that she didn't recognize, so it wasn't a suitable gift. She wanted him to write it again. It was normal that Mississippi Lu couldn't recognize it. She only knew a few words, and the situation that day was different. In order to speed things up, he had used a type of calligraphy that was between cursive and semi-cursive. Anyone with a bit of knowledge in calligraphy would be able to recognize it, but to an illiterate like her, it was naturally scribbled and couldn't be seen clearly. However, she was Mississippi Lu. If second Miss wanted her to write it in regular script, she would write it in regular script. It wasn't a big deal. After Li Yi finished writing, she checked it and nodded in satisfaction. Li Yi reminded her, Don't forget, you still owe me something. What is it? Asked Mississippi Lu with a frown. According to the rules of the Lantern Festival, the lantern and the sachet had to be exchanged in the end. Mississippi Lu took his lantern, so she naturally had to give him a sachet. This was the rule of the game. Since you took my lantern, you have to give me something. It's something that you women wear closely. Reminded Li Yi again. Mississippi Lu frowned even more. What are you talking about? Li Yi pointed at her chest. You still haven't guessed it. That year in the Mid-Autumn Festival, in that garden, those women stuffed it into my arms. Mississippi Lu finally understood. The dude that was stuffed into his arms was thrown away by her. She looked up at him and asked coldly, Are you sure? Li Yi looked at her expression and said in surprise, It can't be. It's not something valuable. You can't even bear to give it to me. Why don't you return the lantern to me? I don't want that thing anymore. Come in, I'll give it to you. Mississippi Lu thought for a moment. She crossed her arms and walked into her room. She said, Remember to close the door. It was just a sachet. Why did she have to be so mysterious and close the door? It was not like she was doing something shameful. Li Yi shook his head and followed her in, at the entrance of the capital magistrate's office. How many times have I told you? No one has claimed the body. It has long been buried in a mass grave. As for where it was buried, how would I know in the dark? A bailiff impatiently waved his hand and said, "The magistrate's office is already doing its best to capture the culprit. The wanted poster has already been sent out. As long as the culprit is still in the capital, he won't be able to escape even if he has wings. Don't worry. Once we have news of the culprit, we will immediately send someone to inform you." The woman said softly, "Even in the hot summer, an unclaimed body should be kept for at least 3 days. Moreover, it is winter now, so it should be at least 7 days later. It's the new year. The coroner has already examined the body. There is nothing suspicious about the case. We just need to wait for the culprit to be brought to justice. The yamen has nowhere to keep it for you. I've already told you what you need to know. I'm warning you, don't cause trouble here again. If you do, we won't be polite anymore." When the bailiff spoke again, his tone had become angry. The woman knelt in front of the yamen and said in a sorrowful voice, "I just want to know how my sister died." On the street, passers-by gradually gathered around and looked at the woman with puzzled gazes. They looked at the yamen's door and pointed at it. When did she have another sister? In the back hall of the yamen, Cui Qingming slammed his hand on the table and said angrily. Tsing Shichen took a sip of tea and said unhurriedly, "Although this is unexpected and there are a few more variables, it may not be a bad thing. If even her family believes that the woman died at the hands of the culprit, then there will be no more changes to the case in the future. I'm just afraid that the changes will happen now." Cui Qingming narrowed his eyes and murmured. Hearing the murderous intent in Cui Qingming's words, Tsing Shichen raised his head and glanced at him. He stood and said, "This woman must not be touched." Cui Qingming smiled and said, "Brother Tsing, there is no need to remind me. I know that if anything happens to this woman, it will attract the attention of people with ulterior motives." Tsing Shichen nodded and said no more. The two of them discussed a few more things before Cui Qingming left the yamen through the back door. When he stepped onto the carriage, his body paused slightly and he turned his head to look at a guard in front of the carriage. He stretched out his hand and lightly waved it in the air. Inside the yamen, at the dining table, a woman heard the rumbling outside and put down her bowl and chopsticks. She said with dissatisfaction, "What is going on outside? There is no end to it, is there?" A yamen runner came in from outside and said with a bitter face, "My lord, that woman did not listen to our advice at all. She has begun to beat the drum and complain about her grievances again." Tsing Shichen put down his chopsticks and his face darkened. He said, "The capital yamen is not a place for her to behave atrociously. Guards, arrest that woman. Give her 20 strokes of the cane and temporarily put her in prison." The yamen runner was stunned and said with some uncertainty, "My lord, this punishment, isn't it a bit too heavy?" Tsing Shichen waved his hand. "No matter. The prestige of the yamen is not to be provoked. Only a heavy punishment will serve as a warning. Just be careful when executing the punishment." The yamen runner said no more and bowed. This subordinate obeys. Chapter 877. At the entrance of the capital magistrate's office, the woman beating the drum was once again stopped by a bailiff. Many passers-by had stopped to watch from the side of the street. They pointed at the woman not far away and whispered to each other. "I saw her beating the drum here early in the morning. I wonder what kind of injustice she has suffered. I heard that it's because of her sister's death. I also heard the bailiff say that she's a criminal. I'm afraid it's not because of the case at the Wonderful Sound Pavilion 2 days ago. That evil thief's wanted poster is posted all over the street. What's she doing here? Could it be that there's more to this case?" As the crowd discussed animatedly, a bailiff walked out from inside and looked at the woman. He waved his hand and said, "Take her down. This is the capital magistrate's office. Is this a place for you to mess around?" The bailiff looked at her indifferently and turned his head to say, "Sir has ordered that this woman has repeatedly challenged the magistrate's authority and obstructed official business. Take her in and give her 20 strokes." Then he walked forward and dispersed the crowd on the street. He loudly said, "There's nothing to see here. Disperse, disperse." Although the drum at the entrance of the yamen was used by the people to seek justice, it was not allowed to be beaten randomly and disrupt the yamen's normal order. However, even though there was such a rule, the woman had just lost a loved one. It was understandable that she was grieving. To punish her like this was somewhat unreasonable in the eyes of the crowd. However, this was not something they could discuss. They could only shake their heads and disperse as they watched the woman being taken in. "Boss, are we really going to give her 20 strokes?" A bailiff looked at the thin woman and said hesitantly, "What if she dies after 20 strokes?" "You pig brain." The bailiff fiercely knocked on the man's head and said angrily, "Sir has said to pay attention to propriety. If she dies, you'll pay with your life." The bailiff who was knocked on the head put on a long face and asked, "What propriety?" The bailiff waved his hand. "It's enough. After beating her, take her to jail and lock her up first. Don't let her come out and cause trouble again." A moment later, the constable came to the pale-faced woman who was pressed on the stool. The scene of the woman's death that night appeared in his mind, and a trace of pity appeared on his face. He shook his head slightly and waved his hand, "Give me the board, I'll do it myself." When the two bailiffs escorted the woman into the prison, they felt that today was an eye-opener. After working in the yamen for so long, this was the first time they saw someone who could walk to the prison on her own after being flogged. "I don't want it anymore. I don't want the sachet anymore. I don't want the lantern anymore. I don't want the poem anymore." Lee covered his butt and limped out of Mississippi Lou's room. He turned around and said, "Take it if you like it. What else do you like? Just take it, it's all yours." Mississippi Lou glanced at him and said faintly, "Who told you not to make it clear?" Lee didn't want to explain anymore. Wasn't it clear enough just now? She owed him the thing that a woman wore close to her chest, and someone had given it to him before. Other than the sachet, what else was there? A belly band? She didn't even think about it. He was a dignified county marquis, a man of indomitable spirit. How could he be so perverted? Mississippi Lou looked at him again and said, "I owe you the sachet. I'll return it to you in the future." "Forget it, not in the future. I don't want it anymore." Lee rubbed his but that was still faintly aching. When did she develop this bad habit? Couldn't she find another place to start? "You have to take it even if you don't want it." After saying this, Mississippi Lou flipped her hair and left him a cool view of her back. Although she said it directly, it was already 2 months later that he received the sachet from Mississippi Lou. If it was a simple sachet, he could just buy one on the street. However, Mississippi Lou was so picky about his gift. She even asked him to make a new copy of the poem. Of course, she wouldn't be so careless with her gift. The cloth used for the sachet was carefully selected from her collection of cloth. She heard from Xiaohuan that second miss took a full 3 days to choose the spices, and then to embroider something on it, sewing the broken pieces of cloth together. In this period of time, she did not know how much was wasted, that was why it dragged until now. She was very good at fighting with others, but when it came to cooking or needlework, it would greatly lower the level of most women. Lee held the sachet sewn by Mississippi Lou. He was very sure that if he wore it out, he would definitely be laughed at by others. However, looking at the eyes of Mississippi Lou, he could only ignore his conscience and nodded, "Very good, I like it very much." Mississippi Lou's somewhat nervous expression finally eased. She said, "It's my first time sewing. There are many places that are not done well, just make do with it." Lee nodded and said, "There are indeed many places that are not done well. For example, there are some marks in the stitching of the cloth, the color matching is not very good, the stitches are thin and dense, the choice of spices seems to be..." Mississippi Lou looked at him calmly, "Also what?" Lee hung the sachet on his waist with satisfaction and said, "It seems, there is nothing to be picky about." No matter how ugly the sachet sewn by Mississippi Lou was, it was still unique in this world. He either insisted on this truth, or beat her and tell her what was wrong with the choice of spices and the matching. Today, Li did not have the time to fight with her for 300 rounds to correct her mistakes, because today was the day that Lin Wanru and Lin Yong set off to return to the Qi Kingdom. The caravan of merchants from the Qi Kingdom who came along with them had left the capital city long after the Lantern Festival. They had stayed for more than 2 months. If they did not return soon, the Lin family's business in the Qi Kingdom would most likely have an unforeseen event. He had discussed all the details of the cooperation with her a month ago. This time, he would also send a caravan of merchants and guards to escort them to the Qi Kingdom. The caravan arrived at the city gate. Rui and Lin Wanru were talking. Rui came down from the carriage and patted her hand, saying, "It's a long journey from here to the Qi Kingdom. Sister Lin, be careful on the way." Lin Wanru smiled and said, "Although it's a long journey, we've gone back and forth several times. With these guards escorting us all the way, you don't have to worry, sister." Then, she walked to Li Yi's side, looked at him, smiled, and stretched out her hand, saying, "Goodbye." Li Yi was stunned, then he also stretched out his hand, and the two of them shook hands. Lin Wanru turned her head, looked at Rui, and explained, "This is a kind of etiquette in our hometown, called the handshake ceremony. It's used to greet friends who have not seen each other for a long time, or to bid farewell to friends who are about to be separated." Lin Yong looked at this scene in astonishment. After scratching his head, he also stretched out his hand to Li Yi, and said with a sad face, "Li brothers, goodbye." Li Yi punched him hard on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Why are you pulling a long face? It's not like you won't see each other. In less than half a year, I'm afraid you'll have to come back to the capital again." Lin Yong smiled honestly and said embarrassedly, "It's not that I can't bear to part with you, Li brothers." Li Yi smiled and said, "Two men, don't be so sentimental. I can't bear to part with the food cooked by Li brothers." After Lin Yong finished speaking, Li Yi was stunned, then he waved his hand and said, let's go, let's go." He watched Lin Yong get into the carriage with a big smile, leaning against the carriage and waving at him. When Lin Wanru bent down to lift the curtain, she looked back and disappeared behind the thick curtain in the next moment. The convoy slowly drove out, and when the last carriage could not be seen, Li Yi turned his head and said, "Let's go back." "Mother," the city gate was crowded with people and it was noisy, but he and Rui both had extraordinary hearing. How could they not hear this childish and somewhat muffled voice? Rui looked down at the little fellow in the swaddling clothes, and a happy expression appeared on her face. She suddenly looked at Li Yi and asked, "Husband, did you hear that just now?" Although the 6-month-old child could not understand language yet, under the deliberate guidance of his mother, he was already able to spit out words one by one. Li Yi sighed and said, "As expected, my wife still won." Li Duan also seemed to feel Rui's joy. He curled up in the swaddling clothes and smiled. He opened his mouth again and made a vague sound. "Little, mother." Chapter 878. Li gently poked the little fellow's soft face and said, "If you want to call me mother, there's no little. Mother." The 2 words he said were not clear. They were vague and could barely be distinguished. A 6-month-old child, even if he was gifted or had been guided early, could only say a few more words. It was unlikely that he would understand the meaning. Li Yi guessed that apart from Rui, Xiao Huan was the one who spent the most time with him. She had heard so much that when she forced herself to say it, she would naturally be confused. However, in this way, who was the winner or Rui? In detail, Xiaonyang was also a mother, so Rui was a little better. When he returned home, the proud Lolita had already come over. She bounced out of the yard and asked, "Sir, where did you and Sister Rui go?" The little fellow stretched out her hand from Rui's arms and said vaguely, "Little mother." Li Yi remembered that when he made the bet with Rui, the proud Lolita was the referee, so she was the one to announce the final result. The proud and pampered Lolita's eyes spun as she said, but little Duan, didn't call out, father, or mother. Sir and big sister Rui didn't win. Li pinched her face and asked, neither of us won, so who won? If neither of us won, then of course the referee won. The proud Lolita said seriously, so, sir, you have to promise me one thing. What is it? As soon as Li said it, he felt that something was wrong. How could there be a referee in a match? However, the proud Lolita didn't give him a chance to change his words. She said with a smile, I haven't thought about it yet. I'll tell you when I've thought about it. She seemed to be afraid that Li would go back on his words, so she ran away quickly after saying that. Rui looked at him, smiled, and said, since my husband didn't lose, then the agreement between me and my husband. Li waved his hand and said righteously, Lil's mother is also a mother, so it's still my wife who wins. Walking on the street with the incognito eldest princess and looking at the orderly Jingdo, Li turned his head and asked, how has the emperor been these 2 days? Mingzi shook her head and said, it's better than before, but I'm still resting in bed most of the time. Li didn't know how to continue this topic. The old emperor's health was deteriorating year by year. Even Li himself wasn't confident. A few carriages slowly approached from the front. Li and she moved back a little. Looking at the carriages slowly moving away, Li murmured, these carriages look a little familiar. Mingzi turned her head to look and said calmly, an envoy from the Qi kingdom. Li asked in surprise, why did the Qi kingdom send an envoy here again? From what he remembered, ever since the third prince of the Qi kingdom had caused a ruckus in the Jingdo, the envoy from the Qi kingdom had returned. Later on, the friction between the two countries intensified. Even now, there were still occasional disputes on the border. What was the purpose of the Qi kingdom sending an envoy here again at this time? To negotiate for peace. Mingzi looked at the bustling crowd in front of them and said, the emperor of the Qi kingdom is seriously ill. I'm afraid he doesn't have much time left. The eldest prince and the third prince of the Qi kingdom are locked in a fierce struggle for the throne. The court is also divided into 2 factions that are evenly matched. This time, the envoy from the Qi kingdom has come to the capital on behalf of the eldest prince to negotiate for peace with us. The eldest prince is the crown prince of the Qi kingdom. Even if the Qi kingdom doesn't value the eldest son as much as other countries, the eldest prince has, after all, entered the East Palace. He's the heir apparent in name. There's no lack of support in the court. Why would he need our help? At this delicate moment, the eldest prince had sent an envoy to negotiate for peace. Naturally, it wasn't just to negotiate for peace. It was likely that he wanted to borrow some power from the Jing kingdom to deal with the third prince. For the crown prince to end up like this, it was truly tragic. Mingzi glanced at him and said, originally, it was indeed like this. Although the third prince of the Qi kingdom has a reputation for being virtuous, he's still the third prince. He doesn't have a legitimate title. However, not long ago, the crown prince of the Qi kingdom turned the entire Qi kingdom into a mess. The people's grievances rose everywhere and the hearts of the people were shaken. Many in the court were disappointed in him and turned to support the third prince. That's why the 2 of them are evenly matched now. It seems, there's such a thing. Li nodded and said, what did the court officials say? Mingzi shook her head and said, they only revealed their intention to negotiate for peace. They haven't formally proposed it yet. My imperial father's health isn't good. He hasn't summoned them these few days. I'm afraid they'll have to wait until my imperial father's next court session. Li didn't have much of an opinion on the matter of negotiating for peace. However, from this matter, he could feel the changes in the Jing kingdom over the past 1 or 2 years. He could still remember when he first came to the capital. The carriage driven by the envoy of the Qi kingdom still dared to run amok on the busy streets of the capital. In just 2 short years, the envoy no longer had that kind of arrogance and despotism. He was even more restrained than some of the nobles in the capital. However, when he left the Qi kingdom, he didn't hear anything about the emperor of the Qi kingdom. Could it be that the saying Inghuo guards his heart was really true? It was just that the person Inghuo was guarding was not the old emperor, but the one in the Qi kingdom. He wasn't so free that he would even worry about the affairs of the Qi kingdom, so he didn't ask more. This time, the princess went out incognito to see the suffering of the people. At the same time, she also went home to get a meal and spar with Mississippi Liu. In the last few spars, Mississippi Liu had always been slightly better. She was usually busy with political affairs, so it was impossible for her to practice martial arts every day like Mississippi Liu. Occasionally, she would spar with him. Perhaps she had even learned something from it and progressed quickly. Of course, in this way, the eldest princess had lost both in person and in spirit. Although compared to before, the gap between the two had shrunk a lot. After drinking too much soup, the effect was naturally not as obvious. In front of Mississippi Liu, it would be difficult for her to raise her chest in this lifetime. Mingzi casually pointed to the front and said, "In front is the government office of the capital. Let's go in and take a look." Li nodded. He hadn't seen County Magistrate Liu for a long time. He didn't know if the hurdle in his heart had been crossed or not. "You too, what grievances do you have? Don't be anxious. Speak one by one." Sitting in the hall, Jingdo Magistrate Liu Dio gently tapped the gavel and pointed to the 2 people below. An old man below replied, "Sir, my daughter went to the river to wash clothes yesterday morning and has not returned yet." Hearing this, Liu Dio furrowed his brows and looked at the other person. He asked, "What about you? Why did you report the case?" The man's expression was sorrowful as he said, "My lord, this commoner's wife returned to her parents' home 3 days ago and hasn't returned since. This morning, this commoner went to her in-laws' home to inquire, but they said that they had never seen her. My lord, you must uphold justice for this commoner. 2 more have gone missing." Liu Dio's brows furrowed even more. In 1 month, there had been over 10 women who had mysteriously disappeared. He was about to open his mouth to ask more details when his eyes flickered and his body suddenly shook. He quickly walked out and bowed. "Greetings, Your Highness, Sir Li." Prime Minister Qin walked out of the door and said to an elegant young man, "After you go back, help me bring a message to the Grand Tutor. Tell him that in 2 days, I will come to visit him." "I will certainly bring the message." Chu Ping bowed and said, "I will remember Prime Minister Qin's teachings. I will take my leave today." Prime Minister Qin nodded and said, "Qin Yu, go see Chu Ping off." Qin Yu walked forward and extended his hand. "Brother Chu, please." Chu Ping looked at him and smiled. "Thank you, Brother Qin Yu." Chu Ping walked first and Qin Yu followed behind him. His footsteps were very slow because the young man in front of him seemed to have trouble moving his feet. His steps were deep and shallow, and his pace was also very slow. Prime Minister Qin watched the 2 of them leave and slightly shook his head. The 2 of them were of the same age, but one of them spent all day visiting the great scholars and learned scholars in the capital, seeking knowledge and dispelling doubts. The other person was a playboy that everyone in the capital hated. In the garden, the large man glanced outside and asked, "Who is that person?" "These past few months, he has been coming to our house every few days, the successor of Grand Tutor Chu. He is thirsty for knowledge and is indeed different from those playboys." The middle-aged man's gaze looked in the direction that the young man disappeared in and slowly said. The large man nodded and said, "He looks all right, but his legs are not very nimble." The middle-aged man's gaze was still looking in that direction. After a long time, he withdrew his gaze and looked at the large man. "You've been by my side for 2 years. The large man scratched his head and said, "I forgot, but it seems so. 2 years is not a short time." The middle-aged man sighed and stood up. He looked at the large man and said, "There is an important matter that I need you to do." The large man revealed a puzzled expression. "What is it?" The middle-aged man waved his hand and the large man moved his ear closer. "Fifth master, don't worry. Leave this matter to me. There will be no problem." After a moment, the large man's face revealed an excited expression. After patting his chest, he quickly left. The middle-aged man watched him leave. After a long time, he sat down again and took a sip of tea. He muttered, "It has already been 2 years. Chapter 879. In the Yamen, Emingzu frowned and asked, "Within a month, there have been more than a dozen cases of women and girls going missing near the capital." Lu Dio nodded and said, "Since the first case a month ago, including the 2 today, there have been 13 cases." The security in the capital had always been good, and there were countless heroes of the martial arts world among the people. There were very few major cases. After the first few cases of women going missing, he didn't pay too much attention. But now, there were a total of 13 cases. As a small magistrate of the capital, he would soon be unable to handle it. Although the court had repeatedly banned the trafficking of women and children, there were still people who dared to do it under the feet of the emperor of Jingdo. Li Mingzhu looked at the 2 people in the hall, whose faces were full of sorrow, and turned her head to ask, "Have you found any clues?" Lu Dio shook his head and said, "I have sent people to investigate many places, and even had the constable stand guard at night. But the thief is very careful and doesn't commit the crime in the same place. Until now, there have been no clues." What did Lu Yizhi say? Li Yi thought for a moment and looked at him and asked, "Has the case been submitted to the Ministry of Justice?" Lu Dio shook his head again. "Assistant Minister Lu is busy with work and has a few major cases on hand. I think that if it is not necessary, it is better not to give him trouble." Li Yi nodded and waved his hand, "Go and bring the files of these cases over." Hearing this, Lu Dio was delighted. He had already seen official Li's ability when he was in Qing and Prefecture. Seeing that the advisor next to him was still in a daze, he kicked him and hurriedly said, "Hurry and bring those files over." Then he looked at Li Yi and Zhang, eldest princess, and said, "Your Highness, officially, please go to the back hall." In the back hall of the Yamen, Emingzu saw Li Yi flipping through the files without saying a word. She couldn't help but ask, "Did you find anything?" "Don't worry. Do you think I'm the reincarnation of Lord Bao?" Li Yi flipped through the files and turned his head. "Lord Lu, please bring me a map of the vicinity of the capital." County Magistrate Lu was more reliable and didn't have as many questions as Princess Royal. Without saying anything, he quickly asked someone to take out a detailed map. February 13th, Yang Village. Li Yi looked back at County Magistrate Lu and asked, "Where is Yang Village?" County Magistrate Lu casually pointed to a place above, and Li Yi drew a circle at that location. Li Yi flipped open another scroll. 16th of February, Wei Village. "Where is Wei Village?" County Magistrate Lu pointed. "Here." At this moment, he had already understood Li Yi's meaning. Even if he didn't know what Li Yi was going to do, he still took the initiative to mark the locations of the missing women on those files. Seeing Li Yi begin to connect those marked small circles with lines, a big net immediately appeared on the map. After that, County Magistrate Lu circled the place with the densest lines on the net. If he still didn't understand what Li Yi was doing, he wouldn't have been able to sit in the position of the magistrate of the capital for so long. With admiration on his face, he immediately bowed and said, "Thank you for your advice, officially." Li Yi put down the pen, waved his hand, pointed at the big circle drawn at the end, and said, "Send people to visit this place secretly. Be careful not to be discovered and alert the enemy. If you find something, don't act rashly. These people have committed crimes repeatedly without being discovered, so they can't be ordinary people. At that time, the Secret Intelligence Office will cooperate with you, since he had encountered this matter, he could only do it conveniently. That was all he could do. Walking out of the county government, the eldest princess shook her head and said, "There are people who are so bold in the territory of the emperor. If we are far away from the capital, I don't know how chaotic it will be. Where there are people, there are evil. The great harmony of the world is just an ideal. It's already amazing to make the world seem peaceful on the surface." Li Yi turned his head to look at her and said, "Miss, work hard." There was no obvious change in the expression on Mingzhu's face. When he sent her to the gate of the palace, he suddenly said, "Don't forget what day it is the day after tomorrow." "What day is the day after tomorrow?" Li Yi's heart skipped a beat. He, who had been traumatized by this, couldn't help but tremble when he heard similar words again. Last time, Mississippi Lu told him not to forget what day it was 7 days later. He racked his brains but couldn't remember it. It was not Rui's birthday, not her birthday, not Xiao Huan's birthday, and not even the 3rd anniversary of their meeting. He had been on tenterhooks for a whole day. He used a roundabout strategy to ask Xiao Huan and found out that his birthday was 7 days later. He had been very depressed about this. How could there be such a strange question in the world? He asked tentatively, "Is it 2 years, 7 months, and how many days?" Seeing that the expression on her face became confused, he immediately changed his words. "No, that's your birthday." "No, your birthday just passed." Seeing her frown, a light flashed in Li Yi's mind. He suddenly said, "I remember. The day after tomorrow is the first day of your menstruation. Remember to drink more water and rest more. Don't get tired. Put aside the affairs of the court for now and let the people below do it." And Mingsu looked at him and said calmly, "The day after tomorrow is the first day of the first day." Li Yi thought for a while and said with certainty, "Last month was also the first day of the first day." And Mingsu said lightly, "On the first day of the first day, you have to go to the morning court. Father specially said that there is only one morning court every month. You won't die if you get up 2 hours earlier." Ah. Li Yi just remembered that in the past few months, if the old emperor was not so sick that he couldn't get out of bed, he would still go to the morning court in person on the first day of the month. "Oh, I see. I have to go to the morning court on the first day of the month." Li Yi nodded. When he turned to walk back, he turned back and said, "However, you still have to remember to rest more." In a room of the Qin family, the big man said apologetically, "Fifth Lord, I'm sorry. I can't do that." The middle-aged man looked up at her and asked, "Why?" The big man sighed and said helplessly, "That girl was taken away by the yamen. I don't dare to stop the people from the yamen." The middle-aged man stood up and asked slowly, "Which yamen?" "The capital magistrate's office." The big man said angrily, "The people from the capital magistrate's office are too despicable. That girl's sister died some time ago, and she went to the yamen to complain. She was arrested and locked up for 2 months. She was only released for 4 hours, and then she was taken back again. They said that she stole something from the magistrate. Isn't this nonsense?" "Fifth Lord, I'm sorry, I couldn't protect her. She stole something from the magistrate and was arrested again." The middle-aged man murmured and sat down slowly. After a long time, he waved his hand and said, "It's okay, it's not your fault." The big man asked curiously, "Fifth Lord, who is the girl you asked me to protect?" The middle-aged man sighed and said, "She is a pitiful person." The big man nodded repeatedly, "She's quite pitiful. Why don't those officials have any sympathy?" The middle-aged man waved his hand casually, "You can leave first." The big man responded, retreated to the door, and closed it. The middle-aged man lowered his head. After a long time, a smile appeared on his face, and he murmured, "Tsing Shichen, Tsing Shichen." Chapter 880. The morning court of the Jing kingdom had long been reduced to a mere formality. There were 3 provinces and 6 ministries to maintain the operation of the imperial court. In fact, there was no need for an emperor. Some important decisions could not be decided by the subordinates, and the eldest princess would be the judge. If even the eldest princess could not make a decision, she would have to ask the old emperor for his opinion. On the first day of every month, the ceremonial morning court would be held. If there was nothing very important, the old emperor would only show up for a short while. Her Highness the Princess, who assisted the government, sat on the lower left side of the old emperor to distinguish her status. But now, the position where Li Yi stood in the court could no longer be leaned against the pillar. His position was only behind the 2 prime ministers, and was equal to the ministers of the 6 ministries. Listening to the reports of the officials in the court, Lin Mingya felt a little sleepy. Suddenly, he heard the sharp and thin voice of a eunuch. Summon the envoy of the Qi kingdom for an audience. These days, the envoy of the Qi kingdom had been very well behaved in the capital city. He was so well behaved that he did not seem to be the envoy of the Qi kingdom. But according to the rumors they revealed, this time they came to seek peace. It was normal for them to be well behaved. The envoy of the Qi kingdom stepped into the main hall. After standing still, he bowed and said in a loud voice, "Greetings, Your Majesty." The envoy of the Qi kingdom had a proper attitude and a humble expression, which made the officials of the Jing kingdom feel refreshed. Because of the great power of the Qi kingdom, even when the envoy was sent in the past, his attitude was extremely arrogant in the presence of the emperor and ministers of the Jing kingdom. Compared with his attitude now, it was like the difference between cloud and mud. And the reason for all these changes was very clear in their hearts. The Qi kingdom and the Zhao kingdom had repeatedly invaded the border. Each time, they were beaten back by the generals and soldiers of the Jing kingdom. After losing several cities, the Zhao kingdom finally calmed down and quietly retreated. The envoy who was sent to discuss the redemption of those cities was still hanging in the office of the Chamberlain of Dependencies. The envoys of the Qi kingdom got straight to the point. After a few ceremonial words, they went straight to the point. The gist of it was that the Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom were neighbors. How many people would die and how much money would be wasted if they were to fight each other all the time? How much money would be wasted? How about the 2 kingdoms shake hands and make peace from now on? They would respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, not invade each other's territory, and not interfere with each other's internal affairs. They would be equal and mutually beneficial, and they would coexist peacefully. As soon as he said this, not only did Emperor Jing stand up from his throne, but the court was also in an uproar. The biggest foreign threat of the Jing kingdom was the Qi kingdom. The 2 kingdoms had been fighting for decades, and the Jing kingdom was the weaker one. Over the past decades, the Qi kingdom had asked for peace several times, paying a heavy price for it. This time, it was the Qi kingdom's turn to ask for peace. This was the first time. As the subjects of the Jing kingdom, their hearts were filled with a sense of belonging and pride. Had the Jing kingdom of today grown to the point that even the Qi kingdom dared not underestimate it? Without waiting for the subjects of the Jing kingdom to say anything, the leader of the envoys bowed and stepped forward. He said in a loud voice, "To show our sincerity, on behalf of the crown prince of the Qi kingdom, we ask His Majesty the Emperor to marry the eldest princess of your kingdom. We also promise that after the crown prince ascends to the throne, we will immediately confer the title of imperial concubine to Her Highness." As soon as he said this, the court, which had been a little noisy, immediately quieted down. Someone was startled for a moment, then frowned. Some people were stunned at first, and then their faces showed a look of wild joy. Li Yi looked at the envoy who was holding the letter of credence from the Qi kingdom, then raised his head to look up. The old emperor frowned. Her Highness the Princess was expressionless. She retracted her gaze, and there was not much change in her expression. Someone immediately stepped forward and said bluntly, "Your Majesty, we can negotiate for peace, but the crown prince of the Qi kingdom must never marry the eldest princess. I second the motion. I second the motion. As soon as Prime Minister Qin said this, many people in the court stepped forward. The Qi kingdom taking the initiative to negotiate for peace was, of course, a very honorable thing to do. If word of this got out, it would raise the prestige of the kingdom. But for the crown prince of the Qi kingdom to marry the eldest princess, it would be a fool's dream. The importance of Her Highness the Princess to the Jing kingdom was self-evident. It could even be said that although she was a princess, she played the role of a monarch. Moreover, she was a wise monarch that was rarely seen in decades. Without Her Highness the Princess, what would become of the imperial court of the Jing kingdom? Normal people would not do such a thing to give such a wise monarch to the Qi kingdom for nothing. As for negotiating for peace, the Qi kingdom did not want to discuss it. After all, they could not defeat the soldiers of the Jing kingdom who had celestial punishment. In short, peace could not be discussed, but marrying the princess was out of the question. Cui Qingming looked at the old man who stepped forward. His expression was calm, but his fists were tightly clenched in his sleeves. He tilted his head to look, and an official stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, if the two countries go to war, how many people will be plunged into misery and suffering? How many brave soldiers of the Jing kingdom will be sacrificed? Now that the Qi kingdom has proposed to negotiate for peace, it is a blessing for the people. I hope that Your Majesty will reconsider." After this official spoke, many people stepped forward to agree. Both sides stuck to their own views and argued endlessly. Emperor Jing put down the letter of credence and pressed his hand down. The imperial court immediately returned to silence. "We can negotiate for peace, but don't mention the marriage proposal again," he said plainly, showing his most obvious attitude. The envoy of the Qi kingdom raised his head and said, "Negotiating for peace is a matter that benefits both countries. The Qi kingdom has shown enough sincerity. Your country should also show some sincerity, right?" As soon as he said this, all the officials in the imperial court looked at the envoy of the Qi kingdom with unfriendly gazes. The envoy of the Qi kingdom was implying that if the Jing kingdom did not marry the eldest princess to the Jing kingdom and did not show enough sincerity, then there was no need to discuss the peace. "Your Majesty, this matter is beneficial to the people. Please reconsider. Your Majesty, don't let the people be plunged into misery and suffering again. Your Majesty, please think of the people of the Jing kingdom and the soldiers at the front line." When a few more people stepped forward, Emperor Jing frowned and looked at a certain place below. Li Yi stepped forward at the right time and looked at those people. He asked, "Accepting the Qi kingdom's negotiation for peace and marrying the eldest princess to the Jing kingdom is to save millions of people and prevent the people from being plunged into misery and suffering?" The leader of the group scoffed coldly and said, "If it can prevent the war between the two countries, why not? Then, in the end, can it be avoided?" Li Yi looked at him and then at the people around him. He asked again, "The Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom have negotiated for peace so many times. Did they really achieve what this lord said?" The official was speechless. If negotiating for peace was really useful, it would have been enough to negotiate for peace once. The envoy of the Qi kingdom would not have appeared in the hall now. Li Yi looked at the courtiers in the hall and said, "Everyone knows that the Qi kingdom has the heart of a tiger and a wolf. They have abandoned the treaty more than once. What credibility do they have? Moreover, Your Majesty is ill and the eldest princess is assisting you in ruling the country. This is a critical time. How can you marry the Qi kingdom? Moreover, the crown prince of the Qi kingdom has lost the support of the people and may not even be able to sit on the throne. What right do you have to make such a promise?" "Ah, you're right, you're right." Old General Shui laughed and walked out. He said, "Sincerity. What sincerity do you want? Do you want Jinfa?" Another old general walked out and laughed. He said, "The Qi kingdom is the invader. What's there to talk about negotiating for peace? If you want to retreat, do it quickly. If you want to fight, the soldiers of the Jing kingdom will not be afraid of you. Prime Minister Shen stood out and nodded. He said, Your Majesty, I think Dr. Li is right. The Minister of War, Yan Bing, stepped forward and said, I agree. The Minister of Revenue, Qin Huan, stood beside him. I agree. The Minister of Left Minister, Dong Wenyun, those who stepped forward were all important courtiers in the imperial court. The two prime ministers had the same opinion. The Shen family and the Wang family were also standing behind Jin Ziguanglu. The opinions of others were actually insignificant. Cui Qingming looked at the row of people standing in front of him. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug deep into his palms. Soon, he loosened his fists helplessly. Regarding the negotiation for peace with the envoy of the Qi kingdom, the opinions of the big shots in the imperial court were unanimous. Peace could be negotiated, but marrying the eldest princess was out of the question. If it worked, they could negotiate. If it didn't work, they could get out. The Qi kingdom was still the Qi kingdom of the past. But the Jing kingdom was no longer the weak Jing kingdom of the past. Li Yi ate a mouthful of egg-fried rice. He looked at the eldest princess and said, You are right. The negotiation for peace with the envoy of the Qi kingdom is fake. They want to use this opportunity to get the help of the Jing kingdom to help the eldest prince ascend the throne. Mingzu held the wine cup, but she didn't eat. She didn't seem to be in a good mood. She looked at him and asked, What do you think about the peace marriage? Li Yi thought for a while and said, Peace marriage. Discord is moral integrity. Peace is also a diplomatic method. As for how I think about it, it can't be generalized. This is what you usually use to fool father. Mingzu swirled the wine cup and said, I want to listen to your heart. Heart. Li Yi raised his wine cup and clinked it with her. He said without hesitation, I don't care if it's the Qi kingdom or the Zhao kingdom. Of course, I won't let you marry them. Chapter 881. The emperor and ministers of the Jing kingdom had firmly rejected the proposal of the envoy from the Qi kingdom. There was no hesitation, which meant that there was no room for negotiation. The eldest princess was not only the eldest princess. She also knew many secrets of the Jing kingdom, including Tianfa, which could not be known to outsiders. These secrets could never be leaked to the Qi kingdom. Not to mention that the current situation in the court depended on the princess. Without the eldest princess, the construction of the academy would come to a standstill. The implementation of the marriage policy would also encounter huge obstacles. The envoy from the Qi kingdom did not propose any more peace talks. The morning court session ended on bad terms. After returning to the office of the Grand Herald, he was not in a hurry to leave, as if he still had a glimmer of hope. As the current leader of the Cui family, Cui Qingming's face darkened the moment he stepped out of the palace. The envoy from the Qi kingdom is seeking peace with the intention of marrying the eldest princess. This is an opportunity that we cannot miss. We cannot let it go like this. After hearing the news, a man from the Cui family walked out anxiously and said hurriedly, Li Yi, this kid, has already grown up. Cui Qingming pressed his palm heavily on the table and murmured, You didn't see the scene in the court today. Just relying on the remaining power of our Cui family in the court is no longer enough to contend against him. But as soon as the man spoke, someone hurried in and said, There is news from the palace. Her ladyship sent a message. Cui Qingming stood up and looked at the lady official who walked into the room with everyone else. The lady official glanced at Cui Qingming and the others. There was no expression on her face. She said calmly, Her ladyship asked me to ask you, Lord Cui, what are you waiting for? Cui Qingming clenched his fists. After a while, he nodded and said, Tell her ladyship that I know what to do. The 6-month-old Li Duan was already restless. Although he could not walk, he could already turn over on his own. He could even walk when supported by an adult. Li Yi planned to build a carriage for the child to learn how to walk. It should be ready in 2 months at most. Mingzu Li is going to be married off to the Qi kingdom. When he was sketching in the room, Mississippi Lu suddenly walked in and asked out of the blue. Li Yi raised his head to look at her, then lowered his head and asked casually, "Who told you that?" Mississippi Lu walked over and took a look. She stood aside and said, "It's just a rumor." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Don't worry, she won't marry anyone who marries to the Qi kingdom. Even if she wants to, she can't. No one in the imperial court will agree to it." Mississippi Lu crossed her arms and murmured, "A 19-year-old princess should have married long ago." Li Yi raised his head and looked at her in surprise. "If I remember correctly, you seem to be a few days older than her, right?" Mississippi Lu turned to look at him and nodded. "You're right." "So, what are you trying to say?" "I told you, my memory can't be wrong." Li Yi lowered his head and continued to draw the blueprint. He murmured, "It's good that she's older, it's good that she's older." After drawing the blueprint, the next thing to do was to make and polish it. The finished product still needed to be tested and adjusted, but these could be left to the craftsman. If it wasn't for Mississippi Lu's reminder, Li Yi wouldn't have realized that she was already 19 years old. Even Xiao Huan had crossed the threshold of 17 years old. She was much more sensible and was about to become a young lady. Only that Tsundra Lolita was still the same as when they first met. It seemed that she hadn't changed at all. She was still as playful as before. She could even play with the 6-month-old Li Duan. This also saved her and Rui a lot of trouble. Li Yi walked into the room and saw the little fellow lying on his back on the bed. The Tsundra Lolita was lying by the bed, blinking her big eyes and looking curiously at the even smaller thing in the little fellow's split pants. Finally, at a certain moment, she couldn't help but reach out and pull it. County Magistrate Lu supported his chin with one hand. There was a thick file in front of him, but his mind wasn't on it. His eyes were blurred. His upper and lower eyelids touched each other and quickly opened again. In the past month, more than 10 cases of missing women had attracted the attention of the higher-ups. They had strictly ordered him to solve the cases within a time limit. However, a few days had passed, and there was no news of those thieves. He hadn't slept for a day and a night since last night. "Your Excellency, good news, good news." Seeing a yamen runner running in from outside with a face full of surprise, County Magistrate Lu quivered. He immediately stood up and asked, "Is there any progress in the case?" The yamen runner shook his head and said, "It's the young master's appointment. The young master has been hired by the Ministry of Revenue." County Magistrate Lu waved his hand weakly. The officials of the Ministry of Revenue had already discussed this matter with him. After that good-for-nothing boy entered the mathematics college, he was enlightened and graduated with excellent grades. He didn't lose face for County Magistrate Lu. This time, he went to the Ministry of Revenue to temper himself, so he didn't need to worry about his future anymore. He waved his hand and said, "I see. You can go now." He was so sleepy that he lay on the table and planned to rest for a while. Not long after he closed his eyes, a thunderous voice rang in his ears again. "Your Excellency, good news." County Magistrate Lu patted the table and didn't even bother to open his eyes. He said, "Okay, I see. You can go now. I'll sleep for a while." After lying on the table and closing his eyes for a while, he felt a little refreshed. He picked up the file and was about to read it. Seeing that the yamen runner was still standing below, he asked, "Anything else?" "Your Excellency, what should we do next?" County Magistrate Lu frowned and said, "What next?" "Detective Zhao has found some clues about the missing woman. He came back to ask you for your opinion. When did you find it?" County Magistrate Lu suddenly stood up from his seat and asked, "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" The Yamen runner was stunned and said, "Didn't you say that you already knew?" County Magistrate Lu had been worried about this matter these days. There was progress in the case, but they didn't tell him immediately. What if, during this period of time, something happened? He glared at the Yamen runner and said, gritting his teeth, "Say it." The Yamen runner trembled and immediately said, "Thanks to your guidance, we followed your method and narrowed the scope of the secret investigation. As expected, we found some problems in a place outside the city. Great scholar Sun has studied scriptures all his life. Although he isn't as good as Qin Wen, he still has unique insights in some aspects. He is far away from the downtown area and lives in a hut outside the city. It took you a lot of effort to find him. Go now." Chu Ping bowed respectfully and said, "I'll take my leave." Ping Er's leg. Watching Chu Ping limp away, the middle-aged man stood beside Grand Tutor Chu and sighed. "That's a human life, a living human life." Grand Tutor Chu watched Chu Ping leave and shook his head. "And he only injured one of his legs from kneeling. I only hope that he can remember this lesson and not repeat the same mistake." The middle-aged man nodded and said, "He has been studying wholeheartedly these days. He has always been aware of his mistakes and has the intention to change." As soon as he finished speaking, a servant from the Chu family came to report that Cui Qingming from the Cui family had come to visit. Chapter 882. Grand Tutor, the Qi Kingdom has taken the initiative to seek peace. This has never happened since the founding of the country. Once we stop fighting the Qi Kingdom, our Jing Kingdom will be able to take this opportunity to recuperate and grow stronger. In the Chu household, Cui Qingming's face was full of excitement, but it suddenly turned fierce. "But that scoundrel harbors evil intentions and has bewitched His Majesty. Even Prime Minister Qin and Prime Minister Shin, the old generals, and many important ministers have been deceived by his flowery words. If we miss this golden opportunity, our losses will be immeasurable." Grand Tutor Chu sat in his seat with a calm expression. When Cui Qingming finished speaking, he looked at him and said calmly, "In my life, I have seen the Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom seek peace 3 times. In the end, the way of the world is still the way of the world. There is always war ahead, and the Qi Kingdom's wild ambition will never be satisfied, but the weak have never had the right to negotiate. The enmity between the Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom cannot be resolved with a peace treaty. The situation in the Qi Kingdom is chaotic now. We only need to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. There is no need to interfere. Moreover, a crown prince of the Qi Kingdom who has not ascended the throne cannot represent the Qi Kingdom. But I know what to do. You need not say more." Grand Tutor Chu picked up the teacup on the table. It was clear that he was sending the guest off. Cui Qingming swallowed the words he wanted to say. His expression returned to normal. He slowly rose and said, "This junior bids his farewell." He walked out of the hall and walked back the way he came. Just as he was about to step out of the Chu household's gate, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. "Brother Cui, Brother Cui." A middle-aged man caught up with him and said, "My father has been in a bad mood these days. If he has said anything overboard, I hope Brother Cui will not take it to heart." "How could that be?" Cui Qingming smiled and said, "Grand Tutor has always been like this. How could I not know? Today, Grand Tutor's words have enlightened me. There are some things that I need to carefully think about." The middle-aged man was relieved. That's good, that's good." At the Chu family's entrance, Cui Qingming looked up at the nation's literary bones plaque. After a long while, he turned around and boarded the carriage. The coachman leaned against the carriage and lifted the curtain slightly. He whispered, "Second master, the Yamen's people seem to have found that place." Cui Qingming frowned. "So fast?" The man nodded and said, "Today, the constables sent by the government are already 5 miles away from that place. I'm afraid they will find us soon. We have to move as soon as possible. Cui Qingming lifted the curtains of the window and looked in the direction of the Chu family again. He leaned against the carriage and said faintly, if they want to investigate, then let them. Go to the capital governor's manor. The coachman lowered the curtain and said in a low voice, I understand, outside the capital, in a certain village, in front of the grass at the village entrance. Chu Ping bowed slightly to the white-haired old man in front of him. Many thanks to Great Scholar Sunday. Today, with Great Scholar Sun's guidance, Chu Ping has benefited greatly. The younger generation will surpass us in time. The younger generation will surpass us in time. We are old now. The future belongs to you young people. The old man stroked his white beard and said, send my regards to the Grand Tutor. I will pay a visit another day. I bid you farewell, elder. I won't be sending you off. Chu Ping walked all the way to the village entrance. There were already people waiting there. A well-dressed young man stretched out his hand and pointed at the carriage beside him. He smiled and said, Master Chu, please. On a high hill outside the village, a constable was lying in the grass. He put away the cylindrical object in front of him and furrowed his brows. They had been following that carriage all day, but from the logo on it, it belonged to a small noble family in the capital. This matter was a bit troublesome to deal with. He turned his head and said in a low voice, keep a close watch here. I will go back and report to the master. At the same time, in the capital governor's manor, Tsing Shichen put down his teacup and looked at Cui Qingming. You don't have to worry about that woman. To prevent her from causing trouble outside, I have already locked her up in prison. As long as we find a reason, she can be locked up like this. Cui Qingming nodded and said, the matter I mentioned just now, don't worry. I will also have people keep a close eye on that place. There won't be any delays. This matter is very important. I will leave it to Brother Tsing. Tsing Shichen looked at him and said solemnly, Brother Cui can rest assured that I will handle this matter. Bide your time. Li Yi crumpled a piece of paper into a ball and threw it into the lake. He didn't quite understand the 4 words that Tsing Shichen had sent him. The arrival of the Qi Kingdom's envoy to the capital was a great opportunity that couldn't be more obvious. Inciting public opinion, colluding with the court officials to force the abdication of the throne, pressuring the emperor, and so on. With a whole set of gifts, the Cui family and their accomplices were almost finished. But if others didn't make a move, it wouldn't be good for him to make the first move. In this way, Lord Tsing's words of bide your time seemed a little out of the blue. He didn't finish his words, and this half was unclear and vague, which was really annoying. Her Royal Highness threw a stone at the lake, leaving a long mark on the surface of the lake. It flew to the other side and disappeared. She asked casually, this time, what other reason can they think of? Li Yi imitated her and threw a stone. The stone sank into the lake with a thud. I don't know. He shook his head and thought for a moment. Suddenly, he said, why don't we be a little more ruthless? Mingsu looked at him and asked, how ruthless? Li Yi pointed at the ripples on the surface of the lake and said, take advantage of the quiet night, when the moon is dark and the wind is strong, and send a few masters to kidnap Cui Qingze, Cui Qingming, and a few other important figures of the Cui family, and then? Li Yi threw another stone into the lake. Mingsu looked at the ripples on the surface of the lake and asked, what if Grand Tutor Chu stands out and opposes? Another thump came from the surface of the lake. Noble consort Cui thawed. What about all the opposing officials in the court and all the people in the world? Then forget it. Li Yi shook his head and lay on the lawn with his hands behind his head. He sighed and said, in this way, the fish in this lake can't be eaten in the future. Therefore, this kind of thing couldn't be rushed. Her side still had to take the righteous side, and basically could only rely on the other side to court death. This was very passive and not easy. As a friend, he did this for her. If she didn't reward him with a very, very high official title in the future, even the heavens wouldn't be able to bear it. Mingzi knew that he was just joking. She imitated him and lay on the lawn with her hands behind her head, looking at the blue sky. At this moment, all the heavy court affairs seemed to be completely erased from her mind like the cloudless sky. Li Yi turned sideways and was about to say something. His mouth opened halfway and his whole body froze. When she lay on the lawn with her hands behind her head, the clothes on her chest tightened, revealing a seductive curve. The two of them were very close to each other. Because of the perspective, at this moment, Li Yi couldn't tell who was the winner between her and Mississippi Liu. In the small pavilion in the lake, Li Xian sighed. He always felt that there was something between Li Yi and Mingzi that he didn't know besides the love between a man and a woman. Unfortunately, the two of them denied it every time. He couldn't get any useful information from either of them. Beside him, the proud Lolita held her chin with her hands and looked in the same direction as him. She also sighed slowly. Chapter 883. What happened to the Ping family? Hearing Detective Zhao's words, County Magistrate Liu frowned and said, "He's just a county magistrate. How can he handle such a big thing?" Detective Zhao asked tentatively, "Then I'll take some people to the Ping family now. Wait a minute." County Magistrate Liu waved his hand and said, "Don't rush. Don't alert the enemy before there is conclusive evidence." A small noble was still a noble with a title of nobility. If it was the Ping family, it would be fine. Not to mention a county magistrate, even a duke would not be able to handle it. But if it was not the Ping family, it would be really troublesome to frame a noble for no reason. While he was thinking about it, a runner suddenly came to report that people from the capital government had arrived. County Magistrate Liu looked up and saw the leading official. He cupped his hands and said, "Lord Han." "Lord Liu." Lord Han cupped his hands and returned the greeting. Then he asked directly, "Is there any progress in the case of the missing girls?" County Magistrate Liu looked at him and nodded. He said, "There is some progress. We can almost determine where those girls were taken." "That's good." The man showed a hint of joy on his face and said, "Our superiors are pressing us, and the government is also under great pressure. Since you have found it, you should take action immediately and close the case as soon as possible, so as not to cause more trouble." County Magistrate Liu frowned and said, "But this case involves a county magistrate." Lord Han waved his hand and said, "So what? He is a county magistrate. He has committed such a heinous crime, and he can't escape the punishment of the law." He turned around and waved to a runner. "Go to the government and get more people here. Today, I will make sure that none of them can escape." County Magistrate Liu saw this and said no more. It was also a good thing for them to close the case earlier. The two governments took action at the same time. Naturally, the battle formation could be described as mighty. The constables of the government were in front, and the county magistrate followed. They quickly went out of the city gate. "Everyone, spread out. Don't gather together. Surround the Ping family from all sides." Lord Han said that no one can escape today. After the leader gave the order, everyone immediately dispersed. In a manner somewhere outside the capital, the guards at the entrance stood lazily, chatting with each other. "Say, who do you think went in just now? To think that the second young master would personally accompany him. Who knows?" One of them shook his head and said, "But it must be a big shot in the city." "Why do you think these big shots, maybe? Those big shots like this. They've tried all kinds of things. It's inevitable that they want to try something new." "Don't you think so?" the person on the left said, but didn't get an immediate response from the person next to him. When he turned his head, he saw a knife pressed against the person's neck. A look of terror appeared on his face, and he was just about to scream when he felt a cold sensation on his neck. "Don't talk. Lead the way." As the cold voice fell, there were noisy footsteps in the surroundings. The two Yamans had sent out dozens of bailiffs for this serious case. Although the Ping family had many guards and servants, they didn't dare to resist the officials. How could they resist? In a short period of time, everyone was chased into the courtyard. A few bailiffs entered the inner courtyard and kicked open a door. When they saw the injured woman tied up in the room, their faces were filled with anger. "Put her down first," the leader of the bailiffs said. Immediately, two bailiffs walked over, untied the woman, and wrapped her in a blanket. Inside the room, the naked man was so scared that he couldn't even speak properly. He said in a trembling voice, What are you doing?" The bailiffs picked up the whip beside him and whipped him in the face. He said angrily, "Put him on and take him away." At the same time, the sound of doors being kicked open could be heard from every room in the inner courtyard. In the corner, a few bailiffs kicked open the door and rushed in. When they saw the man in the room, they were startled and blurted out, "Young Master Chu, why, it's you again." Chu Ping looked back and threw the burning candle in his hand to the ground. He looked at the door indifferently. The bailiff's expression changed and immediately said, "Quick, close the door." The case of the missing women that had attracted a lot of attention in the capital had finally been solved. After the women were kidnapped, they were forced into prostitution by the Ping family just to satisfy some perverted animal desires. When the Yamen bailiffs found the Ping family, there were still many people in the room who were doing the beastly things. They were caught on the spot and put on black hoods. They were stuffed into carriages and sent to the Yamen. The abused women were immediately sent to the Women's Medical Center for treatment. Watching the carriages leave, one bailiff said indignantly, "We were the ones who worked hard these days." In the end, the credit was taken by the Yamen. "Why?" "Shut up." Someone beside him tugged at his arm and said, "Are you blind? Those people who were brought out just now are clearly not ordinary people. Do you think our master would be willing to do something like this?" The bailiffs came to his senses. When he walked through a few rooms, he saw a few familiar faces. They were clearly some of the foppish young masters who often appeared in the capital. His master really couldn't afford to offend the powers behind these people. He clenched his fists tightly, but in the end, he could only sigh and say, "Damn it, I still don't feel good." The banquet at the Chu family had already begun. The middle-aged man looked at the empty seat below and said in confusion, "Strange, it's already so late. Why hasn't Ping returned yet?" Grand Tutor Chu said calmly, "There are many things about Sun Zhongxiu that he can learn from. It's fine for him to come back later." The middle-aged man nodded and said, "Ping has been working much harder than before." Just as he finished speaking, a servant ran in frantically and said in fear, "Master, there's a letter from the capital Yamen. Something big has happened, something big has happened." The middle-aged man frowned and said, "Just what happened? Tell me slowly." The servant handed over a piece of paper. After the middle-aged man finished reading it, he suddenly stood up from his seat and flipped over his chair. The dining table also shook violently. Soup splattered everywhere and countless chopsticks fell to the ground. His face was pale. He gripped the paper tightly and murmured, unfilial son, unfilial son." Grand Tutor Chu slowly stood up and looked at him. He said, "Give me the letter." The middle-aged man held the letter and a hint of hesitation appeared on his face. "Give me the letter," Grand Tutor Chu repeated. Hearing this, the middle-aged man could only respectfully hand over the letter. Grand Tutor Chu took the letter. At first, his expression was rather calm. However, not long after, his breathing began to quicken and he gripped the letter tightly. His eyes were bloodshot and his beard was trembling incessantly. The middle-aged man hurriedly walked over and gently patted his back. He said hurriedly, "Father, father, calm down, calm down. Don't be angry and harm your health, bastard. The descendants of the Chu family have been upright for generations. How could we have produced such a bastard?" After a sorrowful voice, the middle-aged man cried out anxiously, "Father, father. Someone, quickly go get a doctor." Chapter 884. That bastard, where is that bastard now? Grand Tutor Chu had already woken up before the doctor arrived and asked in a trembling voice. The servant replied in a trembling voice, "The magistrate's office said that they did not reveal young master's identity. They should be sending young master home soon." As soon as he finished speaking, a servant announced that Lord Tsang and Lord Chui had come to visit. In the distance, a few figures walked over. At the very front were two middle-aged men, and behind them was Chu Ping, who was limping over. "Lord Grand Tutor, kneel." Chui Qingming had just opened his mouth when he was shocked by the furious Lord Grand Tutor and swallowed the words he wanted to say. Plop. Chu Ping was expressionless as he knelt on the bluestone. "Bastard, how did our Chu family produce such a bastard like you?" Grand Tutor Chu's expression was somewhat ferocious as he raised his walking stick and fiercely struck Chu Ping's shoulder. "This old man will beat you to death today so that my Chu family's ancestors won't be humiliated." Chu Ping's body swayed, but he did not dodge. A cold smile appeared on his face as he said, "Then beat me to death. I'm a cripple anyway. It's a stain on the Chu clan's reputation. It's better if I die." Death is the end of all troubles. Grand Tutor Chu was stunned as he looked at the grandson he had raised since he was a child. He found that after only a few months, he actually did not recognize him. He raised his walking stick but did not lower it for a long time. He murmured, "My Chu family has 100 years of good reputation, 100 years of good reputation, 100 years of good reputation." A bitter smile appeared on Chu Ping's face. "Yes, 100 years of good reputation. As long as you beat me to death, the Chu family will still be the Chu family. The Chu family that is praised by everyone will not lose 100 years of good reputation." He stretched his head out and smiled, "Come, grandfather, I'm ready." Grand Tutor Chu looked at him, his body trembling. The walking stick in his hand could not be lowered. Ping, he put down his walking stick and bent down, using his withered hands to caress Chu Ping's face. His old eyes were filled with tears as he said in a trembling voice, "Ping, how did you become like this?" Chu Ping didn't reply. A pained expression appeared on his face, and he closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were devoid of emotion. He stood up from the ground, and without giving Grand Tutor Chu another glance, he limped back inside. The middle-aged man behind Grand Tutor Chu stepped forward, looked at Tsing Shichen, and asked anxiously, "Lord Tseng, what is going on?" Tsing Shichen shook his head and said, "Today, the magistrate's office received news that many cases of women going missing in recent days were committed by the Ping family of Pingon County. They kidnapped these women and forced them into prostitution in order to satisfy some perverted hobbies of some guests. When the constables broke the door and entered, they happened to see Chu Ping inside." The middle-aged man still had some disbelief and muttered, "This is impossible, this is impossible. Didn't Ping go to visit Great Scholar Sun? Didn't he go ask Great Scholar Sun for guidance? How could he, Brother Chu? Young people will inevitably make mistakes." Chui Qingming waved his hand and said, "Even the king of Shu was temporarily expelled from the capital by His Majesty because of a small mistake made by a young man. Nephew Chu Ping is still young. Although he has followed the Grand Tutor through thousands of mountains and rivers, he has truly experienced too little and is easily tempted by external things. In the future, with strict discipline, he will definitely correct his mistakes and become good again." The middle-aged man sighed and said, "I will have to trouble Brother Chui with this matter." Cui Qingming smiled and said, Brother Chu, do not worry. No one knows that Chu Ping is also involved in this matter. As for other obstacles, Lord Tseng will also help clear them away, just like last time. Thank you, Brother Cui. The middle-aged man said, then turned his head to look at Grand Tutor Chu and said, Father, I will go see Ping. After seeing the middle-aged man leave, Cui Qingming took a step forward and said, Grand Tutor, Chu Ping is still young. It is inevitable that he will make mistakes. Don't be angry, bang. Cui Qingming held his head as fresh blood flowed down his forehead. He stared in a daze at Grand Tutor Chu and said with some disbelief, Grand Tutor, you, Cui Qingming. Grand Tutor Chu's eyes were bloodshot. He used his walking stick to point at him from a distance and said, My eyes can't see clearly. Do you think my heart is also blind? Cui Qingming held his head and looked at Grand Tutor Chu. After a long time, the shock on his face disappeared. With a calm expression, he said, What is Grand Tutor saying? Why can't I understand? Grand Tutor Chu threw his walking stick to the ground and glanced at him with a cold gaze. In a cold voice, he said, Get out. It seems that I have outsmarted myself. As the two of them walked out of the Chu household, Tsing Shichen looked at Cui Qingming and said in a small voice, How can this be considered as outsmarting myself? The wound on Cui Qingming's head was no longer bleeding. However, there was still a lot of blood on his face. When he smiled, he looked rather ferocious and terrifying. Tsing Shichen shook his head and asked, From the looks of it, Grand Tutor probably already knows that you are behind all this. Will he still help the Cui family and His Highness the King of Shu? He is not helping the Cui family, nor is he helping His Highness the King of Shu. Cui Qingming wiped the blood off his head and said, He is helping the Chu family. Tsing Shichen looked at him and said, Hand over Chu Ping and the Chu family will still be the Chu family. Cui Qingming shook his head and said, Before today, hand over Chu Ping and the Chu family will still be the Chu family. After today, the Chu family's reputation for 100 years will be in our hands. As for the choice, Grand Tutor is a smart man. He will know what to do. Father, what should we do? In the dark great hall, the person in charge of the Chu family on the surface walked in and looked at the figure in the depths of the darkness. After a long time, a hoarse voice came from the darkness. How is Ping He? He has already fallen asleep, the middle-aged man replied. No sound came from the darkness. I was wrong from the very beginning. After a long time, a sigh came from the darkness. The old man muttered, I didn't expect the Cui family to be so vicious. Those are living human lives, living human beings. The middle-aged man looked at him in a daze, his face filled with disbelief. Father, you mean, they have already destroyed Ping, and now they want to destroy our Chu family. The old man slowly turned his head and looked at the ancestral tablets of the Chu family in the darkness. He muttered, They want to destroy the reputation that our Chu family has built up over generations. The middle-aged man's body trembled as he said anxiously, Father, you mustn't. You mustn't. The Chu family's reputation for 100 years must not be destroyed in our hands. He gritted his teeth and said with great difficulty, If it really doesn't work, then hand over Ping. Grand Tutor Chu shook his head and said, After they sent Ping back twice, this is no longer Ping's problem. The middle-aged man took a few steps back and muttered, Could it be that our Chu family? Grand Tutor Chu lit the candles in the room and straightened his clothes. He said, Make preparations. In a few days, I will be meeting a few old friends. Chapter 885. Li Yi learned from the Princess Royal that the case of the missing women had been solved. He didn't expect that a powerful person could do such a crazy thing. He turned to look at her and asked, How are those women now? Mingzi shook her head and said, they are still recuperating in the medical center. It's not difficult to heal their physical injuries, but it's their hearts. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, after such a thing happened, they must have a hard time in the future. Instead of being gossiped about, it's better to find a job for them in your place, so that they won't be looked down upon in the future. He had heard about the situation that day. No one expected that the crazy Ping family kidnapped those women just to satisfy some people's perverted desire. The death of the head of the Ping family was not to be regretted, but how could those women who were physically and mentally injured live a normal life in the future? It was a big problem. Mingzi nodded and said, I know this. What are you going to do with the playboys caught by the Ping family and them? Li Yi looked at her and asked. According to the law, the head of the Ping family should be beheaded. Several important accomplices will not be able to keep their lives. Although the other people's crimes are relatively light, they cannot avoid being exiled for 1,000 miles. As for those playboys, the lightest punishment will be exile. Li Mingzhu stood up and said, however, there are still 2 women that we have not found. Li Yi frowned slightly and asked, haven't found them? Mingzi shook her head and said, the Ping family confessed to the crimes they committed and told the details of the case, but they denied that they had kidnapped the 2 women. The servants of the Ping family have also interrogated them one by one, and then conducted a thorough search of the Ping family, but they also didn't find any clues related to the 2 women. Li Yi was surprised and said, could it be that there is someone else involved in the case of the 2 women? I've already sent people to continue the investigation. Mingzhu looked at him and thought of another matter and said, the Ministry of Justice has already handed over the case of the Xing family. Lord Xing was indeed wronged, but the main culprit died on the way to exile, so his family couldn't find him or pursue the matter. The court can give some compensation to the Xing family and Miss Xing. Li Yi waved his hand and said, since they're dead, there's no point in pursuing the matter. Compensation, forget it. But since they were wronged, it's not too much to overturn the case and give justice to the Xing family, right? Mingzhu looked at him and nodded and said, of course. Li Yi cupped his fists at her. Thanks for the matter with the Xing family. Li Mingzhu looked at him and asked, this thank you, are you saying it yourself, or on behalf of Miss Xing? Is there a difference? Mingzhu thought about it for a moment and nodded. Li Mingzhu pondered for a moment and nodded. That's right. There's really no difference between the 2 of you. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, although it's an unjust case, without you, I wouldn't have been able to get the court to admit the mistake. If it's Miss Xing, the court has wronged her, so she doesn't need to thank me. Mingzhu looked at Li Yi calmly and said, if it's you, if it's me, I won't say it. Li Yi waved his hand and said, between us, you should be the one thanking me. And if you really want to thank me, I'm afraid you won't be able to finish it in your lifetime. Mingzhu crossed her arms in front of her chest and murmured, there's still a long lifetime. Li Yi looked over. At this moment, he suddenly had the urge to call Mississippi Lu over and stand shoulder to shoulder with her. That way, it would be clear who won and who lost. When Li Yi saw Mississippi Lu, she was reading in her room. Mississippi Lu was reading a book. This was a phenomenon even rarer than the Antares guarding the heart. Other than those secret scrolls that only had pictures but no words, Li Yi had never seen her seriously read any book. Although Mississippi Lu was literate, she didn't know much. There were even 2 words in the green jade case that she didn't know. It was hard to imagine how she would remember to read something like the Analects of Confucius. She held the book in her hands and seemed to have encountered something she couldn't understand. Her brows furrowed and she quickly flipped through a few pages. Then, she quickly turned back and looked at it again and again. Finally, she grabbed the book impatiently and waved her hand. Only then did a relaxed expression appear on her face. Li Yi took the book that Mississippi Lu had thrown out the door and walked into the room to put it back. He asked, why are you reading this kind of book? Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said, I'm just flipping through it casually. Li Yi knew that she was definitely not flipping through it casually, because on the table in her room, in addition to the Analects of Confucius, there were two other books, such as The Great University and The Doctrine of the Mean. At the very front was the latest edition of the Minghua collection, which was compiled by those busybodies after sorting out the poems that he had thrown out. Since the Lantern Festival, the number of pages of this poetry collection had increased by one. In addition to this book, there was also a thick notes on the Minghua collection. He flipped through it casually and found that there were 17 or 18 notes on each poem. Those people really had nothing better to do. Mississippi Lu looked at the thick notes in his hand and raised her head to ask, in your heart, is that Miss Suemo really so perfect that you would praise her with more than a dozen poems? There was no way to answer this question. At that time, the relationship between the two of them was still a pure relationship between a man and a woman. He had only given her these poems because he wanted to help her. He had never thought so much, but now, it seemed that every single one of them was a naked love poem. When these heavyweight poems were released, they praised her to the point that she was rare in the heavens and hard to find in the mortal world, like a fairy. Then, the other fairies seemed to be a little unhappy. Hey, you've changed your perfume today. What's the smell? It smells quite nice. Li changed the topic without any trace. Mississippi Lu did not answer, and the atmosphere was a little awkward. Well, I heard the news about Yanglio King in the palace today. Li Yi spoke again. He looked at her and asked, do you want to hear it? Not interested. Mississippi Lu said lightly, and then said, but if you really want to tell me, I can reluctantly listen. I don't really want to say it. Li Yi waved his hand and said, read your book first, I'll call you when it's time to eat. Instead of learning the good things, he actually learned to be arrogant from the Tsundere Lolita. The Tsundere Lolita was only arrogant now, but she became arrogant and reluctantly listened. When he walked to the door, Mississippi Lu's voice came again, how about, before we eat, I reluctantly teach you a few more moves. Li Yi turned around and walked back. He said, I feel that I've advanced too quickly recently. It's better to stabilize it, so I won't learn anything new. Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, about her, what did Mingzu say to you? Speaking of the princess, Li Yi thought of something. He looked at her and said, there's no rush for this. A few days ago, Su taught me 2 moves. One of them, I haven't figured out yet. Mississippi Lu's face showed a look of interest. Which move? Li Yi crossed his arms and said, you first do what I do. A look of doubt appeared on Mississippi Lu's pretty face, but she still copied him and crossed her arms. She asked, and then? That's it. Li Yi looked her up and down. He shook his head for the Princess Royal and said, just now, I suddenly figured it out. Chapter 886. The situation in the Wu Kingdom is different from ours. The current emperor of the Wu Kingdom killed his brother and father. He didn't get the throne with a proper reason and didn't win the hearts of the people. He was despised by the scholars in the Wu Kingdom. Although he used force to clean up some of them, the whole Wu Kingdom was in great turmoil. Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu and said slowly, today, more than half of the places in the Wu Kingdom are out of the control of the imperial court. Among them, there are forces loyal to the former emperor of the Wu Kingdom, and there are bandits who took advantage of the chaos. In short, the Wu Kingdom is in a mess, very messy. Princess Duanrong, who disappeared mysteriously after the emperor of the Wu Kingdom seized power, returned to the Wu Kingdom a year ago. She gathered a few generals who rebelled against the current imperial court and also gathered a considerable force. They cleaned up the bandits who occupied the mountains and made themselves kings, and at the same time strengthened their force to fight against the imperial court. Li Yi looked into her eyes and said, you don't have to worry too much. There are many people around your apprentice now. Although it's not possible to overthrow the entire imperial court, they can still protect themselves. I see. Mississippi Lu nodded and turned to walk outside. Where are you going? Li Yi asked hurriedly. Although she didn't show anything in the past year, Mississippi Lu only taught her one precious apprentice with all her heart. How could she not care about her? If she were in the Wu Kingdom now, she would have already led the masters of the Lu League to break into the imperial palace and take the head of the emperor of the Wu Kingdom. Mississippi Lu turned around and said, "I'll go ask Chief Su what tricks he taught you 2 days ago." Li Yi's expression changed. This was more dangerous than her breaking into the imperial palace. He quickly walked in front of her and changed the topic. "Rui, do you remember the Taoist who followed us back from the Qi Kingdom?" "Of course I remember." Mississippi Lu glanced at him. She had only met a few grandmasters. How could she forget? "I heard from Su that the Taoist priest was about the same age as Su, but he looked like he was 2 generations younger than Su. Do you know why?" Mississippi Lu pursed her lips and said, "That's nothing. Taoist Kung Fu focuses on maintaining one's health. It has a certain effect of prolonging one's life and retaining one's youthfulness. That Taoist must be practicing a top-notch youth-retaining technique." I heard from my father before. As she said this, she seemed to recall something from the past. Her tone paused and her face darkened slightly. He was about the same age as Su, but he looked so young. Li Yi had been eyeing old Taoist Yuan for a long time. His interest was immediately piqued and he hurriedly asked, "What? What did our father say?" "Mississippi." Lu came back to her senses. She glared at him and said, "Who's with our father? What you said isn't right." Li Yi looked at her and explained, "You and Rui are sisters. Your father is Rui's father. I'm Rui's husband. Rui's father is my father. In this way, your father is my father. Besides, we're a family." Mississippi Lu did not argue with him. She waved her hand and interrupted him. "My father used to say, our father." Li Yi corrected her again. In the past, our father said that he had seen a Taoist priest who had cultivated the Taoist technique of retaining one's youth to the extreme. He had already lived for 60 years, but he still had the face of a young man. His appearance would not change until he died. Speaking of this, Mississippi Lu did not care at all. She changed the topic and said, "However, although this kung fu can maintain one's appearance, it doesn't help martial arts much. It also needs to buy all kinds of precious medicinal materials. Not to mention the time and effort it takes, the silver alone is not something ordinary people can afford. It's just a useless kung fu." Li Yi said indifferently, "We're not ordinary people. It's not a big deal to spend more money." Mississippi Lu frowned and said, "The silver is not the point. The point is that it's a waste of time. It's better to use it to learn some practical kung fu." Li Yi shook his head and said, "You can't say that. Rui, you're 19 years old this year. It's the most beautiful time of a woman's life. But can you guarantee that you'll still look like this in 10 or 20 years? Let's not talk about other things. In a few years, although you'll keep practicing kung fu and your figure won't change, wrinkles will appear on your face. Your skin will become loose and lose its luster. In a few years, you'll be old and your pearls will turn yellow." "Old and pearls turn yellow?" Mississippi Lu looked at him. Li Yi could hear the cracking of his knuckles. "Pretend I didn't say anything." Li Yi turned his head and walked away. As he walked, he said, "If you think it's useless, then forget it. I'll let Rui practice. I'll let Xiao Huan practice too. By then, you'll be the only one." Mississippi Lu leaped slightly and appeared in front of Li Yi. She asked calmly, "What if I'm the only one?" Li Yi walked around her and said softly, "Only you can experience the complete life of a woman. As a woman, who wouldn't want to remain young and beautiful forever? However, there was a price to pay for everything. using a large amount of time to cultivate the Taoist's youthful but useless technique of retaining one's looks would affect one's martial arts path. But if she didn't learn it, her sister and Xiao Huan could keep their looks. After a few years, she would be the only one who would become old and withered. This was naturally something she couldn't tolerate. Mississippi Lu clenched her fists and looked at Li Yi, who was about to slip out of the door. Chapter 887. In the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Li Yi was cracking melon seeds. Occasionally, he would throw a few melon seeds into the lake to attract a few fish. The proud Lolita, with her sharp eyes and quick hands, caught them with a small net. She then quickly ran to her private courtyard and put them in a transparent fish tank. When only the two of them were left in the pavilion, Li Mingzhu stood up from the stone bench and said slowly, "Grand Tutor Chu has been going around these days. He has gathered some influential scholars and encouraged the scholars in the capital and the vicinity of the capital to write a letter to ask Father to recall the king of Shu from Shuzhou and have him enter the Eastern Palace to preside over the court." What did His Majesty say? Li Yi had already peeled a plate of melon seeds. He picked up the plate and gestured to her. Her Royal Highness took the plate and gathered all the melon seeds that he had spent a long time peeling into her hands. Li Yi secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva and wondered if he had expressed the wrong intention just now. When he handed the plate to her, he clearly wanted her to pinch a few seeds as a gesture. The princess ate all the melon seeds in a way that made Li Yi envious. Then she said, "Father has not expressed his opinion, but this matter has greatly affected the scholars in the capital. It is not a long-term solution to leave it like this. Moreover, Grand Tutor Chu has already begun to visit some officials in the court. It should be for this matter. Many of those people were his students. After all, they have a righteous cause, and Grand Tutor Chu has personally come forward. I'm afraid, the same method used by the Cui family and Grand Tutor Chu had a completely different effect. After all, the latter was simply the benchmark in the hearts of the scholars of the Jing kingdom." With a casual wave of his hand, countless people would echo him. There were peaches and plums all over the world. To be precise, the old emperor was also one of those peaches and plums. Grand Tutor Chu's influence in the Jing kingdom could no longer be described as 100 people at a single call. If it weren't for the fact that the king of Shu had made such a grave mistake, which could be described as a bastard or a rebellion, he wouldn't even need to make such a big fuss. All he had to do was stand out and make his stand clear. Naturally, countless people would follow him. But then again, Li Yi also felt that the old emperor treated the king of Shu and the Cui family differently from the other princes. It was even somewhat out of line with his usual style of doing things. They had been monarch and minister, or friends for so long, and there was a tacit understanding between the Cui family and the king of Shu. "Don't worry. You know His Majesty's temperament." Li Yi smiled and said, "What he has decided is not so easy to change." The Tsundra Loli had already released the fish, washed her hands, and ran over. As soon as she entered the pavilion, she asked Li Yi, "Sir, where are the melon seeds you peeled for me? I want to eat them all at once." Then she saw the empty plate on the table. "Sir." She pouted and looked at Li Yi with an aggrieved expression. Li Yi looked at Mingzhu, and the proud Lolita followed his gaze to look at Mingzhu. Mingzhu stared blankly at Li Yi, and the proud Lolita's gaze shifted to him again. "Sir," Li Yi helplessly pinched her face and said, okay. I'll peel more for you right away." On a grassy slope across the lake, a figure crawling there finally put down the binoculars in his hands. Something's wrong indeed. Li Xian hung the binoculars around his neck and slid down the slope. Through many long-distance observations, he could already confirm that Mingzhu and Li Yi did not have the kind of relationship that he had always thought. They were using this relationship to cover up something that they did not want him to know. What was it that made Mingzhu willing to put down her reputation? The fire of curiosity in his heart burned even more intensely. On the way back to the Academy of Sciences, he ordered a guard behind him. "Bring me the person from yesterday." The guard responded. Not long after, a skinny old man was brought in. After walking into the room, the old man immediately bowed respectfully. "This commoner greets your highness. Dispense with the formalities." Li Xian waved his hand and looked at him. He asked suspiciously, "You said that you can guess what other people are saying by looking at their lips." The old man immediately said, "Your Highness, this commoner has studied lip reading for decades. Although I can't say that I can guess everything correctly, I can roughly guess it. Teach me." Li Xian looked at him and said, "Didn't you want to pass down your unique skill? I'll leave a place for you in the Academy of Sciences." The old man was stunned. He immediately knelt on the ground and said repeatedly, "Thank you, Your Highness. Thank you, Your Highness." The Chu family. The middle-aged man helped the violently coughing Grand Tutor Chu back to his room. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "Father, why don't you not go out for the next 2 days? You've just recovered from your cold. The doctor said that you should rest well at home. Since it's already begun, it can't be stopped." Grand Tutor Chu covered his mouth and coughed. "How has Ping been these days?" The middle-aged man sighed. "He locks himself in his room every day and doesn't say a word. But this makes me even more worried." Grand Tutor Chu turned to look in a certain direction and murmured, "It's my fault. I've restrained him too much in the past. Everyone, let's not be restrained today. We won't go home until we're drunk." At the Cui family banquet, Cui Qingming faced the crowd and laughed. He then raised his cup and downed it in one gulp. "Lord Grand Tutor is willing to help us. This time, we definitely won't lose. Lord Grand Tutor is still the best. We usually don't even get to see those great scholars, much less ask them to help us. This time, even His Majesty will have no choice but to agree to recall the King of Shu back to the capital. The letter of the people has been presented. Now, we're just waiting for an opportunity." In these 2 years, the King of Shu's faction had suffered a series of blows. If they didn't do something to raise their morale, they would probably never be able to regain their confidence. And to them, what could be more important than helping the King of Shu return to the capital? "Come, Brother Cui, let me toast you." The crowd repeatedly toasted Cui Qingming. Although he was the second son of the Cui family, during this period of time, the family head, Cui Qingze, had been depressed. Cui Qingming made all the decisions in the Cui family. Although he wasn't the family head, he was no different from the family head. In a corner of the banquet, Tsing Shichen turned to look at someone beside him. "Why aren't you drinking?" Chen Chong shook his head. "This wine doesn't have any taste." "I think so too." Tsing Shichen smiled and picked up a purple clay teapot. "They drink wine, we drink tea." Qin family. After dinner, Qin Yan raised his head to look at the old man and asked, "Lord Father, what Grand Tutor Chu said today?" Qin Xiang glanced at the person below, who was engrossed in eating. He shook his head and said, "My Qin family will not participate in this matter." Although the brothers of the Qin family who were officials in the court still had countless doubts, since their Lord Father had already spoken, they could only nod. On the way back to the room, the large man asked the Qin family's 5th master in surprise, "5th master, who is that old man who came to our house today? Why does even the Prime Minister have to bow to him?" The Qin family's 5th master explained, "That is Grand Tutor Chu. When Lord Father was young, he was also his disciple." The large man still wanted to ask more, but the Qin family's 5th master's footsteps paused. Then, he quickened his pace and walked to the door. Seeing a figure at the door, he asked in surprise, "Lord Father, why have you come?" "I couldn't sleep, so I took a walk." Qin Xiang shook his head and said, "It's getting late. You should rest early." The Qin family's fifth master nodded. Qin Xiang turned to leave, but his footsteps paused again. He turned his head and asked, what do you think of the current court? Didn't father say that the current court has rarely been so clear in decades, and that I shouldn't listen to the nonsense of outsiders? The Qin family's fifth master paused, then said, moreover, I'm not in the court, so I really can't see clearly. Qin Xiang raised his head to look at the dark clouds covering the night sky, where not a single star could be seen. He sighed and muttered, the sky is about to change. I just can't see clearly. The proud Lolita, who had recently come to their house to freeload, frequently looked at her dazed husband and reminded him, Sir, the meat in the pot is cooked. Li Yi came back to his senses. Looking at the slightly curled up lamb meat in the pot, he shook his head and said, there's no rush. Let's wait for it to float up. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.